Hi everyone, please subscribe to my channel. Blood Immortal Venerable. See playlist for other chapters and novels. I do not translate the novels. Credits goes to original translator and author of the novel. I only make it as an audiobook so it would be easier to just listen while doing other things. Credits goes to the author of the novel. I convert stories to audiobook for mental health, for multitasking purpose, for accessibility and time saving. Listening to audiobook is also beneficial for people who have disability. It improves our listening skills and improve our English comprehension, vocabulary and other things. So, thank you for listening. Thank you and thank you very much for your support. Chapter 1241, The Balance of the Five Elements. The law power of the five elements was independent of the other original laws. In most ways, it was the most original law power of this world. Most substances were made up of the five elements. It was quite easy for any warrior to utilize the law power of one element. Since many cultivation methods were driven by the law power or used it to perform a specific skill. When displaying certain special martial skills, one was required to fuse 2 or 3 types of law power together or use them alternately in order to achieve the desired results. This skill asked for a massive amount of practice and comprehension. For most ordinary warriors, simply comprehending 5 different types of law power was already astonishing enough. But it was not so difficult for Zen. However, the secret method of the G family demanded an absolute balance between the law power of the 5 elements, namely the power of metal law, wood law, water law, fire law, and earth law. This could prove to be an enormous challenge, even for Zen. In fact, balancing the powers of the 5 elements was an incomparably powerful martial skill. The 5-element palm print that Lucille had used was a combination of this secret method and a palm martial skill. It was a dynamic and strong skill, but since Lucille's 2 bodies had not merged into one, she failed to balance the powers of the 5 elements perfectly. At this moment, Zen's thumb flashed with a dazzling golden light. If anyone made the mistake of looking at it directly, they would feel a pricking behind their eyes. This was the power of the metal law. On his index finger emanated a warm and flickering flame. This was the power of the fire law. A heavy aura exuded from his middle finger, the power of the earth law. His ring finger was enveloped in watery waves, the power of the water law. As for his small finger, it brimmed with the green energy of life, the power of the wood law. Although Zen could not balance these 5 law powers perfectly either, his fingers were still able to firmly clasp onto them because of the advantage of his chaotic energy. The woman in white looked at Zen's hand and was shocked to see the powers on his fingers. Like Lucille, the woman was also a member of the Thoughtless Minds. Her family was as huge as the G family. Although she was inferior to Lucille in terms of status and talent, she still recognized that the fusion of the 5 elements was a secret technique unique to the G family. Moreover, it was the most noteworthy cultivation method of the family's patriarch. This secret method, as far as she knew, was not allowed to be taught to outsiders. So how did this young man before her not only refine a magnetic sacred mountain, but also learn the G family's secret technique? She felt more and more curious about where Zen came from. Zen concentrated on the powers of the 5 elements. These powers severely restricted each other, so it was difficult to keep control of them in the palm of his hand. He had no leisure time to pay attention to others, so he did not know that the woman in white was staring at him unblinkingly. I didn't expect there to be such a strong repelling force when one gathers the 5 law powers in their palm. Zen thought to himself. On one hand, the 5 elements restricted each other. Metal chopped wood, wood broke earth, earth absorbed water, water quenched fire, fire melted metal. On the other, the 5 elements also generated each other. Metal produced water, water nourished wood, wood fed fire, fire created earth, earth bore metal. No wonder the first step to this secret method entails balancing the powers of the 5 elements. If one type of law power is even slightly stronger than any of the others, it will affect the other law powers and cause a chain of mutual repulsion. Only by balancing them perfectly can they coexist in my palm, Zen thought to himself. He tried to maintain the powers on his fingers as he pushed his palm toward the magnetic sacred mountain in front of him and tapped it lightly. With his touch, he wanted the G family's secret method to get absorbed into the mountain. Subsequently, he would draw out the magnetic power from it. But at this moment, the watery power on his ring finger flashed and pounced at the flame on his index finger. The flame extinguished automatically. In turn, it exerted influence on the power of wood law on his small finger. Puff! Due to the imbalance, the powers of the 5 elements on Zen's fingers dissipated one by one. Zen smiled bitterly and shook his head. This was more difficult than he had anticipated. As he retracted his hand from the magnetic sacred mountain, the white-clothed woman broke the silence. The fusion of the 5 elements is a powerful secret of the G family. It seems to me, you have only just begun to cultivate it, correct? Zen shot her a brief glance and gave her a small nod in reply. In the outside world, he would have tried to conceal this fact. But in the illusion battlefield, all warriors were at the Soul Sea realm and very knowledgeable themselves. He could not be bothered to hide the truth from them. I heard that even the ace talent of the G family spent 6 years comprehending it. I'm afraid it's impossible for you to achieve any progress in such a short period of time, the woman continued. In her opinion, Lucille, the renowned genius of the G family, was one of the top talents in the younger generation. Few people in the entire universe were more talented than her. She thought Zen was in a great haste to obtain quick results, so he was using the time here to cultivate. It was a terrible mistake for warriors to be impatient for success as they practiced a new cultivation method. The woman felt it to be her responsibility to advise Zen on this matter. However, Zen only smiled and said nothing in response. Under his control, another group of 5 streams of chaotic energy were extracted from the chaotic sea. They flowed into his palm. Soon, 5 different rays of light materialized in his hand again, their stunning colors illuminating the room. Puff! This time, he did not try to control the powers forcefully. As expected, the powers lost their balance faster than in the last attempt. In the blink of an eye, the 5 different law powers interacted with each other and dispersed. Seeing this, the woman's eyes flashed with a glint of mockery and disdain. Even Lucille had spent 6 years on this. Even if it takes you 10 years to get the gist of this method, it is an achievement to be proud of. She thought. She believed it was impossible for Zen to master the technique so quickly. However, she knew nothing of Zen's personality and his past successes. The more challenging something was, the keener Zen was to overcome it. After his second failure, Zen quickly drew out 5 more streams of chaotic energy. This time, he manipulated the arrangement of the powers. He condensed the power of water law on his thumb, the power of fire law on his small finger, and the power of metal law on his middle finger. In this way, the inter-restricted powers were separated from each other. Although he was still unable to achieve a perfect balance, he could feel the repulsive force between the law powers weakened due to this arrangement alone. Once again, he tapped the miniature mountain in front of him. As soon as his palm touched the mountain, he began to draw out the magnetic power of the secret method. Buzz! Another palm imprint appeared on the other side of the magnetic sacred mountain. The shape and size of the imprint was much the same as the one left by Zen. Puff! But Zen failed to hold on any longer. The powers of the 5 elements dispersed from his hand once again. However, at the very moment that the powers departed, Zen's eyes flashed with comprehension. He quickly encircled his hands around the magnetic sacred mountain and caused it to rotate like a top. As his hands circled around it, a gray ray of light took shape on his palm. The light was like an imprint as it hovered on Zen's palm. It stayed for a moment before it quickly started to dissipate. In mere 3 seconds, the light vanished into thin air. So this is the magnetic power? Zen wondered. It was a pity that fighting was prohibited in this room. Otherwise, he would have tried to test the might of the magnetic power. Still, even though Lucille had boasted about this powerful skill, Zen did not take it seriously. After all, he was the owner of the fairy palace, and the palace was equivalent to a treasure mountain. He did not care for the cultivation methods of other origins. What he did not know was that he had grossly underestimated the magnetic power. The magnetic power was a significant part of the cultivation of the 5 elements godly way. To some extent, this was somewhat inferior to Zen's emotion-closing godly way, but it was still a godly way in any case. As for the woman who had been observing Zen from the sidelines, her mouth opened in surprise when she saw Zen draw out the stream of magnetic power. Utter disbelief was written all over her face. Hasn't he only just started to learn the secret technique of the G family? How is this possible? She wondered. Chapter 1242, 10 Warriors. Undeniably, Zen had not been entirely successful. During his fight with Lucille, she had struck out with her palm, drawing out a magnetic power thousands of times stronger than Zen's. Zen had just now suppressed the laws of 5 elements and forcefully extracted the magnetic power. He was able to draw out a strand of the magnetic power after only 3 trials. Lucille would probably have been stupefied if she had witnessed the scene. That had been too rapid by far. In her time, she had been sent to Magnetic Sacred Mountain by the patriarch of the G clan to cultivate for 3 years. She had only managed to extract a sliver of the magnetic power at the end of the second year, but Zen had merely spent an hour on the entire process. The woman in white was a core disciple of another large clan in the Thoughtless Minds and was only second to the Ace Talents. She had known how intimidating the Ace Talents were from a young age. Among other warriors of age, Lucille was like a proud phoenix, always superior to the others. She was cared for and doted by her elders at all times. The strength that Lucille displayed far surpassed that of her friends and peers. The woman in white was naturally unwilling to be inferior to Lucille. The difference in their talent levels troubled her. In secret, she had worked hard in her cultivation, trying to close the chasm between her and Lucille. She had made up her mind to surpass Lucille, come hell or high water. However, despite her ambitions, she still had a grasp on reality. There were warriors in this world who were far different from her. Even if she worked harder, the gap between her and Lucille might only become larger. This was the strength of the Ace Talent. As an Ace Talent, Lucille had spent 6 years only mastering this secret skill. However, it only took Zen some minutes to start to comprehend it. Was he a monster? The woman was curious to see how much of the clan's secret skill Zen could comprehend in the short time, but Zen had put away the magnetic sacred mountain for the moment. It was not that Zen was unwilling to continue cultivating, but fighting was prohibited in this room. Drawing out even a stream of that magnetic power would come to waste. After putting away the magnetic sacred mountain, Zen did not stop cultivating. He continuously used chaotic energy to transform the 5 types of law power in his palm, seeking that sense of balance. Only after the 5 types of law power were fully balanced could he employ the magnetic power with ease. Suddenly, a thin line became visible on one of the walls in the room. The line appeared on a corner and then spread. After spreading for about 7 feet on the wall, it turned to a right angle, forming the outline of a door. Buzz, buzz, the entire door began to glow. Not long after, it was pushed open. A warrior entered in the passageway. The 6th warrior. The crowd stared at the visitor, their eyes flashing with curiosity. He was also a human warrior. He wore a round hat and appeared to be arrogant. When he noticed the gazes of the people nearby, he snorted maliciously. "Why are you looking at me like that? Is there something drawn on my face?" The warriors who could collect iron tickets and receive 5 million illusion points were considered to be remarkable. They could be successors of world lords or top warriors of sacred places. The warrior such as the human who had just entered the room was usually labeled as being very ordinary. As the woman in white and the other 2 human warriors registered what the intruder in the round hat said, they remained calm. Silently, they judged him in their hearts. Zen had a small smile on his face. He still concentrated on controlling the balance of the 5 different powers in his palm and easily ignored the human warrior with the round hat. But the ogre warrior seemed displeased by the human warrior's words. He did not intend to cause the newcomer any trouble, but he wished the human did not speak so rudely. "Hey, come closer. I want to look at you," the ogre warrior said. "You dare to look at me?" the warrior with the round hat said, glaring at the ogre warrior. "Of course I dare to look at you. So what?" the ogre said with some irritation. "If you continue to stare at me like that, I will." Hearing this pointless conversation between the human and the ogre warrior, Zen, the woman in white and the other 2 warriors could not help but roll their eyes. They knew the rule of this room: fighting was prohibited. As talents of the Soul Sea realm, why were these 2 engaging in a futile quarrel? It was senseless. The ogre warrior's voice was sonorous. As he argued with the warrior with the round hat, his voice echoed in the room. The room was not so big, so it indeed got noisy. At the moment, Zen did not mind it. He focused all his attention on the power of the 5 elements on his fingers, as if he could not hear the argument around him. The woman in white frowned, her face livid. The other 2 human warriors also looked annoyed. "If you 2 continue quarreling, I will kill you 2 after we leave this room." The short human warrior finally shouted, unable to bear it any longer. As the short warrior said this, he extended his hand. A short sword floated in the air toward him. The appearance of the sword was ordinary, but there was a unique inscription on its blade. A faint golden light emitted from the blade, and within the light were a few incomplete Sanskrit characters. As the new human warrior and the ogre warrior, previously engaged in a squabble, saw the short sword, they were a bit stunned. Their faces betrayed their surprise. "Is this the supreme divine weapon, the Buddha curse blade?" The warrior with the round hat stared at the short warrior. "You are a cultivator of the blessed Buddha land, correct?" More than 3,000 supreme divine weapons existed in the entire universe and many warriors had them memorized. Although the warrior with the round hat had never seen this short sword before, he had already guessed at its origin from its aura and appearance. Buddha Curse Blade. People could get killed if Buddha cursed them with a few words. The Buddha Curse Blade contained a very strong killing intent. It was the most famous weapon in the entirety of the Blessed Buddha land and was the ultimate treasure of the black-faced Buddha house. The short warrior must be extraordinary, for he was able to bring the short sword to the illusion battlefield. Most of the warriors in the Blessed Buddha land were monks. Naturally, they all wore monastic robes and were without hair. However, not all were like this. The Blessed Buddha land was considered to be the sacred place of Buddhism, but some people who went there to cultivate were not required to obey all the rules of the land. The woman in white glanced at the short warrior's sword, her face placid. Although a supreme divine weapon was rare, it was not enough to intimidate her. The Buddha Curse Blade. Hearing the others talk about the supreme divine weapon, Zen could not help but quickly glance at the short sword. Once again, he turned all his attention to the power of the 5 elements in his palm. Revealing the sword seemed to have left quite an impression about the short warrior. The warrior with the round hat realized that the short warrior before him was indeed formidable. He hastily tried to cover his face with the brim of his hat and moved to a corner of the room. The ogre warrior's eyes were still provoking, but he did not shout anymore. After the entry of the warrior with the round hat, another thin line appeared on another wall. Another door opened. The 7th warrior entered the room. She was a woman from the Demon Knight. Without causing any disturbance, she glanced at everyone in the room and kept her back against the wall, maintaining an upright posture. She took out a long arrow from her bag and ceaselessly traced the bright arrowhead with her fingers. Quite a few warriors in this supreme world had obtained iron tickets, and they were all attentive of the others who had them too. Most of them hesitated before using the iron tickets. After all, it cost them 5 million illusion points to enter the Hall of Causality, which meant that they chose to part reluctantly with what they treasured. However, as more and more warriors entered the Hall of Causality, some of the warriors who had been hesitating outside grew more resolute. The number of warriors in the room increased rapidly. Less than 3 minutes after the Demon Knight woman entered the room, another door was pushed open. The 8th warrior. It was an ogre warrior. Within seconds, another door opened. The 9th warrior. The 10th warrior. Zen had waited in the room for about half a day, and now 10 people were finally gathered here. All of us are here now. The woman in white smiled, stood up, and then said to Zen, "All right, we can set out now." The woman did not give off an air of hostility. She was instead very polite to Zen. Zen smiled back, "But there's no door in this room. Which direction should we go in now?" "There is no need to move at all. Just stand where you are," the woman in white replied. Right after this, the walls around the room collapsed with a loud bang, giving way to the outside. Chapter 1243. Trying to break the small skulls. After the 4 walls collapsed, they immediately disappeared. The ceiling above their heads also vanished in a flash. Before them appeared a majestic mountain. This massive mountain was submerged in thick white clouds and surrounded by mist. It looked like something straight out of a fairyland. The 10 warriors, including Zen, stood on a platform at the foot of the mountain. The iron ticket only mentioned the Hall of Causality. "Why is there a giant mountain before us?" Zen asked curiously. The others had no reply to Zen's query. After all, it was the first time that most of them had entered this place, so they could not answer his question. "Once we go up the mountain, we will understand what the Hall of Causality is," the woman in white said with a smile. "All the restrictions will be dismissed after we leave this platform," she added, "but I do not want you all to fight each other." "And why should we follow your orders?" A sinister voice floated over them. It belonged to one of the warriors. Some martial artists had well thought out plans of making their moves. Since everyone present could afford to spend 5 million illusion points to enter the Hall of Causality, they most definitely had plenty of illusion points left. The white-clothed woman kept smiling. "The illusion points you can get at the Hall of Causality will be more than tens of millions. If you have good fortune, you may even be able to get your hands on some supreme divine weapons that are yet to appear. So if you people want to waste your time and strength engaging in fights over here, go ahead." Hearing this, realization dawned on the warriors. Since the warriors could get into the Hall of Causality, they obviously possessed a good number of illusion points. Even after paying up 5 million illusion points, they must have several more left with them. Illusion points were accumulated bit by bit, from the numerous battles they all had participated in. But now they had the opportunity to acquire over 10 million illusion points in the Hall of Causality. Moreover, they might be able to acquire supreme divine weapons. Considering this, the warriors who had previously planned to fight the others now hesitated. The woman in white no longer needed to worry about this issue. She nodded at Zen. Let's go. She was the first to step down the platform and onto the stairs of the mountain. Zen's eyes twinkled. From what the woman in white said, it seemed that he could obtain a large number of illusion points here. That number could even be over 10 million. No wonder his ranking had dropped instead of rising. Most of the warriors ranked before him had probably entered the Hall of Causality already. Compared to the way he had plundered his illusion points, it was indeed hard for him to keep up with the speed of gaining points at the Hall of Causality. He refrained from thinking too much of it. Following the woman in white, he stepped onto the stairs as well. However, an unexpected thing happened. The moment Zen stepped on the stairs, a bad premonition rose in his heart. He raised his head and heard a series of familiar sounds. Crank, crank. Those skulls had appeared again. It had been some time since Zen got rid of the skulls. He had not expected them to follow him again the moment he left the room. Previously, when Zen had used the teleportation token to travel from a main city to another, the skulls had caught up to him unbelievably quickly. Zen had used the iron ticket to enter the Hall of Causality. He did not know how far he was from where he had been before, but the skulls still followed him. Zen shook his head. Could it be that after leaving the illusion battlefield, they would be able to follow him inside the fairy palace as well? In the illusion battlefield, everything was only a verisimilar projection. He did not truly mind being followed by the skulls here. However, it would be the most troubling if the skulls managed to chase him into the fairy palace. As for the other 9 martial artists, they were utterly startled by the scene. Even the woman in white, who was leading the way, was stunned to see the approaching skulls. What is this? Zen, on the other hand, remained placid. He had almost gotten used to it. I got myself into this trouble at a secret place. Is that so? These little skulls cannot be chased away. As the woman in white asked this, she walked over to Zen's side and picked up a small skull from behind his back. She carefully observed it for a moment before releasing a thin streak of lightning from her slender fingers. Crack! As the lightning shot out, it wrapped itself around the skull. Although this bolt of lightning was considerably tiny, Zen was secretly surprised at the power contained within it. The power inside the bolt of lightning was indeed astonishing, and the light it emitted was dazzling. However, it turned out to be useless. After the lightning dissipated, the skull remained undamaged. As these small skulls couldn't be dealt with, the law of causality they contained could be as tyrannical as the law of the heavens. But if the skulls had been so easy to destroy, then the Supreme Lord who had besieged Zen that day would not have had those many small skulls hanging behind his back. Even a Supreme Lord could do nothing about it, so how could a Soul Sea Realm warrior possibly disperse them? Ha ha, let me try. The one who said this was the ogre who had been provoking the others previously. In that room, he had seemed to want to fight everyone. But now, he was being rather civil. The ogre took hold of a skull. I'll give it a try too. This skull is in fact a divine weapon. I wonder if I can destroy it. Give me one please. There are so many skulls behind the boy. You can go get one yourself. The other warriors gathered around Zen and studied the skulls on his back. Zen, who stood rooted to the spot, rolled his eyes. Aren't we here to get inside the Hall of Causality? Why is everyone so interested in the skulls behind me? Seeing the expression on Zen's face, the woman in white covered her mouth to suppress a smile. She loosened her grip on the skull and it flew to Zen at once, biting his back. She said, if I'm not wrong, these skulls come from some kind of curse. You are right. Zen shrugged lightly. The legend says that there is an ancient sorcerer race that secretly merged with the laws of the heavens, using curses to steal a heavenly destiny. It is said that their spells are extremely powerful and there is almost no way to break them, the woman said. Steal a heavenly destiny? Zen repeated the words, slightly surprised. The woman smiled. I don't really understand it either. There are only 128 heavenly destinies. If one used an unorthodox method to obtain one, then they would certainly be punished by the heavens. A heavenly destiny was the supreme law of causality in the universe. There were 128 heavenly destinies altogether. When a Supreme Lord died, a heavenly destiny dissipated and a new crown of destiny was born. However, there was no mention in the legend as to what method the ancient sorcerer race had used. The power of their spell even surpassed the law of causality. Such spells had already crossed the limits of the heavens, so the heavens could not stand them. Warriors today assumed that it was the reason why the ancient sorcerer race vanished from the universe in one night alone. However, more than 1 billion years had passed since the disappearance of the ancient sorcerer race. It had long ago become a story sealed away by time, and the speculations that went about were not 100% true. Let's go. I forgot to mention that flying is prohibited in the Hall of Causality, so we can only climb the stairs step by step, the white-robed woman said and continued climbing up the winding stairs without pause. Zen followed behind her. At the same time, the 8 warriors behind Zen continuously tried out their own methods to try and break the tiny skulls. I can't split it. My dark demon saber has been damaged by the skull. The ogre held a black saber in his hand, his face full of sorrow. His saber was also a first-rank divine weapon, but the small skull remained undamaged with its cut. A half-moon crack appeared on his saber. Fortunately, the weapons used in the illusion battlefield were still safe and sound in the outside world. Otherwise, the ogre would have undeniably been pissed. Now his saber was damaged, and there were many battles ahead of him. Without his first-rank divine weapon, it would be tough for him to continue fighting. Hearing the ogre's words, the other 7 warriors stared at him as if he was an idiot. They had only been curious about the little skulls, so they picked up some from behind Zen. Was there really a need to work so hard with it? Of course, no one could break through a single small skull, so they had given up. The small skulls flew back to Zen, their small white teeth tightly biting his back. The other 8 warriors followed Zen and ascended the stairs. Chapter 1244, First Hall. The white jade staircase was about 20 feet wide. From the foot of this majestic mountain, there were hundreds of thousands of steps cut into the mountain to the summit. Although flying was prohibited, the speed maintained by this group of 10 wasn't slow either. With the white-clothed woman's warning, the 10 of them had lowered their vigilance quite a bit. After all, in this supreme world, these 10 people were basically all ranked in the top 1,000, while in the entire illusion battlefield, they were ranked in the top 100,000. No one had earned more confidence that they would be able to defeat the rest of the group in one go. Not to mention that the woman in white robes had even told them that they would be awarded 10 million illusion points in the Hall of Causality. They would clearly face no obstacles or danger here. Along the way, the white-clothed woman took the lead with Zen following closely behind. The other martial artists maintained a measured distance and made the ascent at a steady pace. Behind them, the short martial artist from the human race brought up the rear. After tirelessly climbing for 5 minutes, the group stopped in front of a large hall set halfway into the mountain. The staircase extended through the hall, and connected to the stairs at the back. If they wanted to continue climbing, they would have to pass through this hall. This hall was entirely white and had a magnificent appearance. It was unknown what material was used to construct it, but there were no signs or warnings on the outside wall. Among the 10, this was the second time that the woman in white had entered the Hall of Causality. None of the rest of the group had done so before. The eyes of the crowd were fixed on the woman in white, who boldly led them. The woman in white smiled and said, "This is the first Hall of Causality. It isn't too difficult to pass through. Everyone can enter now." Zen nodded. Since he had already spent 5 million illusion points, he didn't hesitate anymore. Therefore, everyone followed behind Zen and walked into the hall. There was nothing inside, the hall was empty. All of the martial artists present had already explored several mystic places within the illusion battlefield. A sense of caution rose in everyone's heart in the face of this apparently empty building, including Zen. It was just like when he had entered the top of the sacred Ailanthus. Although its surroundings were quiet, it had actually been extremely dangerous. If he had been like any other martial artist who was careless, he would have perished immediately. But even someone as strong as Zen had no idea of how to deal with the pile of small skulls ravenously chasing behind him. Seeing how cautious everyone was, the woman in white smiled and said, "Don't be too nervous. This is the first Hall of Causality. It won't be too difficult." "What's in the Hall of Causality?" someone asked. The woman in white smiled and said, "As the name implies, the rules of the heavens are used as a method of attack in the Hall of Causality. Every attack contains the law of causality." Although the woman in white looked relaxed, her words still caused everyone's expression to change slightly and the hair on the backs of their necks rose in response to unspoken threats. Even Zen's eyes flashed. Any method that involved the law of causality was a mid-ranking rule or even a top-ranking rule in the universe. Why were supreme divine weapons so powerful? That was why. The law of causality contained in them was the reason. When it came to the methods related to the law of causality, they were all difficult to oppose. For instance, when a supreme lord released the highest power of the law of causality, which was carried in the heavenly destiny, the power was strong enough to instantly kill all 10 people present. They wondered how this woman in white could still laugh under such a situation. Then what's the danger in this first Hall of Causality? The warrior in the round hat asked in a low voice. The woman in white shook her head and said, "It seems as if the danger is different every time. I'm not sure either, but I know that the level of difficulty of the first hall of causality is not that high. As long as you are careful, you can all pass here." When the woman in white saw the hesitation on everyone's faces, she turned and entered further into the hall as example. She looked behind her and saw that the 9 people behind her, including Zen, did not follow her at all. These warriors didn't easily trust in others at all. She felt like she was an idiot, who was being used by them to explore the way ahead before they would risk following. When the woman in white took a few steps forward, a mysterious rune appeared on the left wall of the Hall of Causality. The center of the rune was carved with a strange figure, and from the mouth of the figure, a white light shone brightly. After this light appeared, it flew out of the wall and headed at an incredible speed towards the woman in white. "Watch out," Zen warned. They had indeed been a bit unkind to let a woman lead and explore the way. But her earlier words about the law of causality, which was involved in all the attacks, still frightened the group. Even Zen had become more wary. This ray of light looked ordinary, but in reality, it contained a killing intent. Zen did not fully understand the profound mysteries contained within this light. Though, at the very least, Zen was certain that he would die if he was pierced by this white light, even though he wasn't sure of the rules of causality that were contained within it. There was also a hint of surprise and concern in everyone's eyes. What was this hall of causality? Why was such a terrifying attack being used from the very start? The woman in white was extremely calm and she simply took a step back. As she watched the white ray of light pass within a foot before her, another mysterious rune appeared on the opposite side of the wall in the hall. Within the rune was a drawing of a strange animal, and the light immediately entered the sketch's mouth and disappeared. As I've said, the first hall of causality isn't too difficult. As long as we're careful, we'll be able to pass without any obstructions, the woman in white said, her voice faintly betraying some contempt for the 9 warriors who had waited behind her. Then she took a few more steps, and another white light appeared on one side of the wall, and sped across the hall and into the other wall. At this time, Zen and the others also took large strides forward and cautiously followed behind the woman in white. The trials of the first hall of causality truly weren't that hard, and the warriors all seemed somewhat shamefaced at not being brave enough. For these martial artists, even if there were hundreds of beams of light in the hall, as long as they were given enough space, they would be able to freely run a gauntlet of them. However, this light still proved a potential threat to everyone. It was like someone walking on the spot as if he was walking on flat ground. If he were to be placed 100 meters high into the air, although there was a wide path in front of him, he would still slow down due to some misgivings. The instinct of self-preservation was very strong in everyone, and this had made the warriors hesitate. Such was the mindset of many warriors at the moment. They had come so far, and didn't want to fail now. Every 10 feet within the Great Hall, they would encounter a white light. And as the group continued forward, the speed of the white light beams that passed by became faster and faster. In terms of speed, this was relative. In the eyes of Zen and the other warriors, the speed of the white light wasn't much faster than that of a snail. After all, with their own incredible speeds, they might not even have needed the time for a single breath to completely traverse the Hall of Causality at full speed. However, the white light gave them a sense of fear, and they did not dare to walk rashly. Their eyes followed the rhythm of the light and waited until it passed by before taking another step forward. The speed and frequency of each ray of light was not same. The further they went into the hall, the greater the speed at which the light came out. Sometimes the light would suddenly cross the hall, stop in the middle of the space for a moment, and then unpredictably accelerate to the other side of the hall. Sometimes, the light would rush from one side of the hall to the other at a speed that the group could not even see clearly. It would wait for a few seconds before repeating itself. These beams of light could be seen moving around in regular patterns. To these martial artists, this was just a small trick. As they became more familiar with the patterns of the light, their minds became more relaxed and their speed picked up, becoming faster. "We still have another 100 feet before we pass through this hall," the woman in white said. She seemed to have become the undisputed leader of this group. "What's the reward for passing through the first hall?" the ogre martial artist asked. "You'll know once we get there," the woman in white said with a mysterious smile. At this moment, Zen suddenly stopped in his tracks. He looked at the white light that passed close by him, and once again had the idea of throwing off the skulls behind him. Would this white light be able to destroy those small skulls? As he thought of this, Zen once again took out a small skull from behind him. Carefully holding the bottom of the skull with his hand, he placed it on the track of the white ray of light. Swish! The white beam of light suddenly shot out and instantly struck the small skull. At the same time, Zen instantly felt an enormous power in his hand, the strength of which far exceeded Zen's imagination. It was probably many times more powerful than the power that Zen had lit up with all his dragon scales. Zen's expression changed drastically, and he immediately let go of the skull. He witnessed the white ray of light being deflected away by the small skull, heading towards the ceiling of the Hall of Causality. Bam, bam, bam. Other than the white ray of light ricocheting in all directions, the black skull was also bouncing up and down at an extremely fast speed in this Hall of Causality. Chapter 1245. She lost the battle. The walls of the Hall of Causality were riddled with the rules of heavens, just like the walls of the main city, they were virtually unbreakable. After being hit, the small skull unleashed some kind of overwhelming momentum. It bounced so fast that it was impossible for anyone to dodge. When the crowd witnessed the scene, they were left dumbfounded and stood blankly on the spot, not daring to make a single move. Bam! Suddenly, the small skull shot toward an ogre warrior, smashing right into a spike on his shoulder armor. The ogre's armor served as a first-rank divine weapon, it constantly absorbed the warrior's life vitality and fused with the warrior's body. Its strength was nothing to scoff at, either. But the small skull missed by only an inch and collided with the spike, turning it into powder. With that, the ogre's tall and sturdy body got knocked down to the ground. Pa, pa, pa. Then, the skull shot all the way to the endmost wall in the hall and bounced all the way back outside. The white deflected ray of light bounced out as well. Throughout the entire scene, no one dared to move. Staying still was the best thing to do in such a situation. After the two objects bringing fatal attacks disappeared from the hall, everyone released a sigh of relief. But the ogre warrior stood from the ground and glared harshly at Zen. Do you want to kill me? Once we leave this hall, we shall have a duel. When the white light hit the small skull, it produced the powerful potential energy. Even though Zen had instantly released his hand, his fingers had still been paralyzed by the vibration. Hearing the ogre's proclamation, Zen stretched out his fingers and faintly smiled, his eyes tinged with a piercing light as he stared at the ogre warrior. Then, he responded, if you want to challenge me, I accept. Seeing Zen's calm gaze, the ogre couldn't help but feel a sense of nervousness. The fierceness of Zen's eyes made the ogre stop himself just as he wanted to make some more rude remarks. Although the ogre appeared to be reckless, he was a cautious individual. In the room just then, he had observed the entire process of Zen's cultivation. Although he couldn't quite understand what Zen cultivated, he could tell from the woman's reaction that Zen was extremely powerful. Earlier, he had challenged him recklessly out of anger, but he wasn't confident about fighting him. Currently, he only held 5 million illusion points, having spent all of them just to enter the Hall of Causality. It would be such a waste if he was driven out of the hall if Zen defeated him. Many of the other warriors were also left displeased. But it wasn't the time for them to quarrel about anything. Now that the rules of the first Hall of Causality were clear to everyone, it was actually very easy to pass through it so long as they took good control of the speed and frequency. For the rest of the journey, they spent only a short while passing through it. But just as they passed through the hall, a small, black object floated in from the front door. It was the small skull that shot out just moments ago. Earlier, it shot out at a great distance. After the great amount of potential energy was exhausted, it slowly flew back towards Zen. But as it flew back, it bumped into another white light ray. Everyone, including Zen, ran away upon seeing this scene. They practically charged out of the Hall of Causality. Meanwhile, on the platform at the back of the Hall of Causality, a bunch of yellow illusion points suddenly appeared and flew right at the crowd. The reward: there are only 100 illusion points. That's not enough. Only this much for making it through the Hall of Causality. It has to be worth so much more than this. Initially, everyone's anger was directed at Zen, but now that they saw how small the reward was, they began shifting their attention to the woman in white. She told them that the reward would be plentiful, but they only got a handful of illusion points. The woman in white then looked at them with wide eyes. Why are you looking at me like that? I didn't arrange this place for you. Exploring the first Hall of Causality doesn't have that high of a difficulty level, so the reward isn't that big. You're already lucky. I only got 50 illusion points in the last round. Hearing that, everyone turned morose. They had paid 5 million illusion points just to enter the place. Earning only 100 illusion points from passing through it was undoubtedly a great loss on their end. But since they had already entered the place, they had no choice but to keep moving forward. If they were to give up, they would really have lost everything without getting a chance to earn it all back. Stepping onto the steps once again, the woman in white smiled and said to Zen, "You're making everything more difficult." But Zen merely shrugged. "I didn't know such a thing would happen." These little skulls were indeed more difficult to deal with than Zen could have imagined. The others looked straight at Zen as the woman from the Demon Knight warned, "I hope that nothing like this will ever happen again." "Yes, it's too dangerous," added the short human warrior. "Although I know you want to deal with these skulls, it's better for you to consider everyone's safety first," he said to Zen with a small smile. Though that warrior had been rather irritable before, even threatening to kill the noisy ogre warrior, he now seemed less indignant when it came to addressing Zen. If the warriors blamed him with a bad attitude, it would naturally put Zen in a solemn state. After all, his actions just put everyone in further danger. After hearing the warrior's words, Zen smiled and said, "Indeed, I was too reckless. I just didn't expect that the slow white light would contain such a powerful force. It doesn't matter, just be more careful from now on. No one should be at the risk of harm. If they were bitten in the back by these skulls, they wouldn't be this calm." "Are you still okay?" another human warrior asked from behind Zen. He couldn't figure out how Zen still looked completely unscathed even though his back had been bitten by the skulls. So he just had to seize the chance to ask Zen about it directly. "I'm fine, let's keep going," Zen said with a smile. After all, he wasn't willing to just share the secret of his body with a stranger. Knowing that Zen wouldn't answer, the warrior merely stared at Zen before walking up the steps. After passing through the first hall, the woman in white no longer led the way. "Hey, I still don't know your name." Just as Zen was about to take another step, he heard the woman in white ask. "My name." With a flash of his eyes, Zen smiled and answered, "My name is Thad Luo." Under normal circumstances, it wasn't appropriate for Zen to say his real name. It was all too known throughout the universe and he wanted to avoid any unnecessary trouble from others finding out his real identity. The woman in white smiled when she heard Zen's introduction. She then turned to Zen. "You're lying." "How do you know?" Zen asked, not bothering to hide anything after she figured it out. "It's my talent. When people lie, their hearts beat a tinge faster," she explained to him with a smile. "I see," Zen merely nodded. "What about you? What's your name?" "I'm Janet G," she answered. The G clan was the fourth-ranked clan of the Thoughtless Minds. The Thoughtless Minds was different from the Humanity Alliance. Since the latter was called an alliance, it was also regarded as a colossus formed by countless sacred places. But the Thoughtless Minds was controlled by the four great clans which made it very powerful. Although these four great groups were called clans, they had an influence that went beyond that of the average 10th grade sacred place. Any one of these clans was more powerful than some entire races in the universe. But the main reason why they were so outstanding was that there were supreme lords supporting and guarding these four great clans. Janet G was particularly remarkable, second only to the ace talents in the four clans. "Janet, well, it is a good name," Zen said with a smile. Returning the smile, Janet said, "The cultivation method you practiced just now was very familiar to me. I've seen one of my friends practice it before. I don't know if." For a long time, she had been very curious about the origins of Zen's cultivation method. But they hadn't been familiar with each other before then, so she knew that she couldn't get an answer out of him just any time. "Your friend, who?" Zen asked. After a moment of thought, she replied, "Lucille G." Hearing this, Zen smiled again. "It so happens that the secret skill I cultivate was acquired from this woman." "Oh, you've seen Lucille, then?" The news was rather surprising. Never did she think that Zen would have learned such a secret skill from her. Why would Lucille teach him this cultivation method? Spreading the G clan's secret technique was quite a crime. Even if she was an ace talent, she wouldn't be forgiven for having done such a thing. "I've seen her and I've fought with her." "Fought? Were you defeated by her?" Still pondering over the secret technique, Janet suddenly uttered the question upon hearing what Zen said. While she could see that Zen was indeed a powerful warrior, he was still nothing compared to Lucille in her eyes. She lost the battle. This made Janet stop in her steps. After climbing up a few more steps, Zen turned around and asked, "What's wrong?" Chapter 1246, Giant Stones. To be honest, Zen didn't really know what Lucille meant to Janet's heart. It was known that the Thoughtless Minds had four great clans. One was Lucille's clan, and the next one was Janet's clan, while the other two were the Xuanyuan clan and the Sun clan. It could be said that the four clans were the most famous of their kind among the humans in the universe. Even those supreme lords wouldn't be able to develop their clans to reach the four great clans level. The four great clans were great powers that supported the human race. They cooperated well and strengthened their connection with marriages. In addition, they held a great competition amongst themselves. It was safe to say that these 4 clans affected the thousands of supreme worlds of the thoughtless minds. In one previous great competition among the 4 clans, Nathan Xuanyuan had not risen to prominence yet. The image of Lucille standing at the peak was deeply engraved in Janet's mind till now. For her, almost no human martial artist from the younger generation could fight against Lucille. Nathan Xuanyuan rose to power primarily because he had merged with the heavenly fragment and subsequently became a godly genius. If Lucille could truly comprehend the 5 elements godly way, she would also be a godly genius. If so, Janet felt that Nathan couldn't even match up to Lucille. No one among the Soul Sea Realm warriors could defeat Lucille. Or at least, that was what Janet thought. Thus, she was stunned when she suddenly heard Zen said that Lucille had lost. She stared blankly at Zen, disbelief written all over her pretty face. The fusion of the 5 elements that Zen practiced was indeed a G-clan's secret technique, but this was not conclusive evidence for Janet that he could defeat Lucille. Perhaps Lucille taught this secret technique to Zen for some reason, but that did not mean that she would lose to him. Although Zen was confused by Janet's reaction at first, he quickly understood a bit and smiled. "What? You don't believe me?" Janet stared at Zen and cautiously asked, "When you saw Lucille, what color was the snow behind her?" "Is it important?" Zen asked curiously. "What color?" Janet repeated. "White, pure white." Zen felt exasperated at Janet's question, but she continued. "Yes, 100% pure white," he answered helplessly. Janet sighed in relief when she finally got an answer from him. "No wonder." "No wonder what?" Janet's lips curved into a wide grin. "I guess you did win against Lucille, but that was only because Lucille exerted half of her strength. Technically, she only used 60% of her strength at most," she said with a smile. Understanding then fell upon Zen's face when he heard what Janet said. The Lucille he saw last time seemed to have something special. When Janet saw Zen's strange expression, she continued, "Lucille practices the cultivation method named one soul in 2 bodies. Your victory against Lucille last time can't count as a real one. If she fused with Lucy, then that would be her true strength. Only by defeating Lucille at that time, you could be considered to be truly stronger than her. One soul in 2 bodies. And who is Lucy?" Zen's brows slightly rose. It was true that Lucille was the strongest opponent Zen had met in the illusion battlefield. However, Zen had never thought that she was still not at her full strength at that time. Judging from the name one soul in 2 bodies, it seemed that Lucille had a clone named Lucy who was about the same level as her. "I hope I would still get a chance to fight her," Zen said and smiled faintly. "You will. When the time comes, you'll know how terrifying Lucille actually is." Janet nodded. Yet, Zen didn't think too much about if Lucille's strength was really as terrifying as Janet had said. Besides, he still needed to raise his ranking continuously in order for the competition to bear fruit. He had no time to think about other things. Another 5 minutes had passed as he climbed up the stairs. Everyone had already arrived at the mountainside, where another hall of causality had appeared. However, this hall of causality was several times larger and wider than the previous one. There were 8 warriors in front of the hall of causality, who were already waiting for Janet and Zen. They were actually waiting for Janet, to be exact. Janet had always been the leader. Only she was familiar with the halls of causality, so no one wanted to enter the hall without her at the helm. The second hall of causality. Janet looked at it and said, "Every hall of causality is different. Whether or not you can pass it depends not only on your own strength, but also your own reaction and judgment. The difficulty of passing the second hall of causality will greatly increase. Be careful, guys." Then, Janet walked in without any hesitation. The others followed suit after she went in. This hall. There was nothing but white light that shot out of the walls in the first hall of causality, which was quite simple to pass through. As long as everyone was careful, the warriors at the Soul Sea Realm or even a weaker one could easily pass through the first hall of causality. It was also why the first hall was worth only 100 illusion points. Meanwhile, the floors and walls of the second hall of causality were bathed in a thin layer of gold, which made it look luxurious. There were many enormous square stones in the center of the hall. These square stones were 30 feet high, 30 feet wide, and 30 feet long. There were complex carved patterns made by an unknown race on their surfaces. The warriors were at least several dozen feet away from those square stones as they looked at them. They looked left and right, but couldn't tell anything special about the stones. In the end, they all turned towards Janet. Now, Janet still wondered how strong Zen really was and was guessing his true identity. Janet's strongest ability should be slightly stronger than half of Lucille's power. Since Zen said that he had defeated Lucille, she pondered about how much strength he exerted to win against Lucille last time. However, there were too many factors that determined victory or defeat in a martial artist's fight. It usually depended on one's strength, but it could also be affected by one's mentality, luck, or even how much one paid attention to details. Perhaps Janet would need to challenge Zen if she wanted to know how strong he was. It was just that the Hall of Causality wasn't suitable for a fight, but she should have a chance when she reached the illusion battlefield's final test. Her mind was such a mess that she didn't notice everyone's eyes were on her again until now. The Hall of Causality is different every time. This is also the first time I've seen it, she said snappily. She's right, how can we let a girl shoulder the risk of leading us? A human warrior said with a smile. Since no one wants to take the first step, let me do it. After that, he pulled out a sword from the scabbard that hung around his waist. He picked up the long sword with narrowed eyes, then, faint blue dots of light appeared and flickered after he closed eyes. The blue dots of light slowly took the shape of a human, and then it finally completely transformed into that human martial artist's appearance. Sword spirit. Zen's eyes slightly flashed when he saw the warrior's sword spirit. What a solid sword spirit. It would be perfect to use a sword spirit to scout the way. Now that we don't understand the rules of this Hall of Causality, we may die early if we're not careful. It's a pity that we don't have any puppeteers in the team. They had gotten somewhat familiar with the Halls of Causality after they passed the first one. At first, they were all shocked when they heard the words, Law of Causality. The others would have a hard time passing through the Hall of Causality if someone in the hall had mastered some kind of Law of Causality, even if the one were only at the Soul Sea realm. After all, some laws of causality were too powerful for anyone to risk going against them. After they had observed for a while, they concluded that the trials in the Hall of Causality had some certain rules. One still had a small chance of passing through after having figured out the rules. The sword spirit of that warrior was indeed incomparably solid, but it still had some minor flaws compared to Zen's. When Zen's sword spirit materialized, it was no different from a real person. On the other hand, the human martial artist's sword spirit was still a bit imperfect that one could tell that it was illusory when looking at it closely. However, it was already good enough to be able to condense a sword spirit to this degree. After the sword spirit took form, it walked towards the center of the hall. Everyone's gazes were fixated on it. It was still quiet from the hall's entrance to the central section. But just as the sword spirit approached a giant stone, it suddenly shook and rolled before it aggressively crushed down the sword spirit. Chapter 1247, Rolling Stones. Had this been an ordinary rock, then the 10 people on the scene wouldn't have even batted an eyelash. Moreover, even if it was 30 feet tall, it wouldn't even be enough to cause any sort of damage to the sword spirit. Of course, that was if it had been an ordinary rock. But it wasn't. It was a huge stone in the middle of the Hall of Causality. There was surely more to it than met the eye. The fact that they could not destroy this stone was surely going to give them a headache. The human warrior who controlled the sword spirit gently shook the long sword which signaled the spirit to retreat. Boom! There was a loud explosion as the giant stone rolled to the side and smashed into the air, causing the entire Hall of Causality to tremble. The stone continued to roll and followed the sword spirit's path of retreat. Its speed had now exceeded the sword spirit's dodging speed. The warrior saw this and smiled. His long sword shook once again and the blue sword spirit suddenly transformed and split into 7 to 8 blue swords. The swords scattered in all directions before eventually coming together again and turning into a human-shaped figure. The second hall isn't that difficult, the warrior said. He was confident that he'd be able to pass through this hall easily. However, just as the huge block of stone rolled down, one of its sides was revealed to them. It was a ghost face and it looked extremely ferocious. It had dark eyes, sharp teeth, and an evil smile. The smile gave chills to anyone who looked at it. The stone seemed to possess a certain level of intelligence since it was able to identify the controller of the sword spirit. This sentient block of stone was 30 feet long and 30 feet wide. Each time it rolled, it would do so at an extremely fast rate. Given the rather limited space, it had no problems crossing the entire hall and arriving in front of the human warrior. However, the warrior remained calm. Despite looking so formidable, this stone could only roll in a limited space. The entire floor of this hall was divided into several squares in a sort of grid pattern. Whenever it rolled, it did so according to the grid pattern that was on the ground and it could only roll either to the front, left, or right. Rolling diagonally meant it would first have to roll to the left, and then forward. The warrior's figure flashed as he moved towards the inclined top of the stone. The stone could only roll to the side and try to press down on him. However, before it could do that, the warrior's figure flashed again and evaded the stone's roll. It was obvious that he was playing with it now. Boom, boom, boom. The bangs continued as the warrior continued evading the stone. He took advantage of its inability to move diagonally and maintained a slanted position on the grid pattern. If you guys do as I do and maintain a diagonal position against the stone, then passing this second hall won't be a problem. His words were quickly taken note of by his party members. They would have to exercise constant vigilance if they wanted to keep their lives in here. A split second of carelessness would be enough for the stones to crush them. If that's the case, then we should get through this hall quickly, one of the warriors said, rushing into the hall. The moment he entered, 2 giant stones rolled over and followed him. Janet, who watched this, tutted in disapproval. What's wrong? Zen asked, quickly noticing the frown on Janet's face. Something's wrong. The second hall's difficulty shouldn't be this low, she said. Ever since the beginning, she had emphasized the importance of teamwork if they wanted to get past the hall of causality. It wouldn't be good if so many people got killed this early, since the difficulty of the halls would progressively intensify later on. However, despite doing well on the initial stage, Janet knew that it would be impossible to pass through all without any sort of minor injury. In her previous venture, only 2 people of her original party were able to get to the final stage. This meant that all their efforts had been in vain and that they failed in passing the hall of causality. She clearly remembered the second hall being more challenging back then. 3 people even died. You mean, we didn't actually figure out the real rules of this hall? Zen asked. I think so, but maybe we should go through it first, she said, taking small steps forward. The rest of the team began to advance. At the same time, all of the giant stones began to roll out. The sound of rolling stones was deafening as it echoed throughout the entire hall. Rumble, rumble. Everyone followed the human warrior's advice and moved along the diagonal lines on the grid pattern. This meant that the stones would have to constantly change their directions, which made it difficult to keep up with the warriors. This second hall was several times wider than the first one, but it didn't take them that long to reach the end. We made it. Ha ha. This one's pretty easy, although the reward isn't that much. I don't know if I'll be able to get back my 5 million points. Look, that's. Just as they thought it was all over, a fence made up of rows of white light rose before them. The exit was blocked completely, making it impossible for them to continue forward. What is this? Why is it not letting us pass? The ogre warrior screamed in frustration. Zen also frowned. This white light barrier was a problem, and the stones behind them were now quickly rolling towards them. Retreat, Janet ordered. I knew it wasn't going to be that easy. She quickly turned into a white shadow and dived downwards just as a stone pressed towards her. The way is blocked. Is it some sort of mechanism? Or do we have to fulfill a certain condition to pass? Zen pondered as he dodged the stones. Ah, help! Someone shouted not too far away. Zen looked and saw a warrior who had gotten himself backed into a corner surrounded by 3 stones. Zen quickly shot forward and sent out a palm strike towards the warrior. Bang! Zen's attack sent him flying out of danger while he quickly found a gap between the stones and escaped. Thad! Janet screamed in panic when she saw what he did. Why in the world would he put himself in danger like that? She still wanted a chance to challenge him. It would be a shame if he died so early in here. If he got crushed, then he wouldn't have only wasted his 5 million illusion points. He would also lose half of his remaining points and take a plunge in the rankings. It wasn't just Janet, the others were also equally shocked by Zen's actions. Although they were a team, that was only because they were forced to be. They were far from being a consolidated unit who understood each other completely. Some of them even had enmity with others, so it was truly strange for Zen to risk his neck just to save that warrior. His willingness to sacrifice touched them a bit. However, they also thought it was really stupid. Nobody would be able to resist the pressure of these stones once they pressed down on you. They would immediately get crushed and die if ever that happened. Chapter 1248. Square Light Beam. The moment a square stone pressed down, Zen's face was full of calmness as a white mist rose from his body. 8 smoky melodies. At this moment, Zen's body turned as light as a feather. Although the rock was rolling incredibly quickly, it was extremely large. Zen's 8 smoky melodies was a quite unique one. Such was a movement technique that was like dancing on the tip of a blade. The faster and stronger the opponent was, the smoother Zen's body could move. Up until now, only the crescent blade under Lucille's feet had managed to break through the 3-inch limit set by the 8 smoky melodies. But Zen confidently dodged the stone in front of him. Whoosh! Under everyone's watchful eyes, the stone came crashing down on Zen. But at this moment, his body moved strangely. He took steps horizontally, like a leaf that had been squeezed out after being disturbed by the palm wind. What is this movement technique? One of the others blurted out in confusion. When Zen was out of danger, his figure floated down. But of course, he didn't have time to answer the question because 2 more square stones began pressing down on him. After the crowd rushed away from the exit of the hall, they once again began fighting with the rolling stones. "Thank you for saving my life," the warrior instantly thanked Zen. With a slight smile, Zen only shook his head. "We are going to venture through the Hall of Causality together. When necessary, we'll need to cooperate with each other and work together. Helping you also means helping myself." With this, the wariness among the 10 of them was fortunately dispelled. Initially, some warriors had their own selfish thoughts. After all, if anyone was to be crushed by a giant stone, letting their illusion points burst out, then the others could naturally take advantage of such an opportunity. Now that they truly wanted to go further, they understood that teamwork became extremely important. "But with that white grating blocking our way, I wonder how we'll manage to pass," someone said, already sounding depressed. "Everyone, be careful, there must be some sort of mechanism here." As everyone retreated, they discussed how to make an escape. At this time, the short human warrior from the Blessed Buddha land suddenly offered, "Perhaps the mechanism is on these giant stones." With that, he turned around to avoid the giant square stone in front of him. Surprisingly, a short sword appeared in his hand, a supreme divine weapon, the Buddha curse blade. Whoosh! His body flashed around the huge rock. While he wasn't able to fly in the hall, his speed just increased dramatically. The Buddha curse blade in his hand slashed lightly across the huge rock. Whoosh! The moment the Buddha curse blade slashed down, a crisp sound rang out. A swastika mark then appeared on the stone's surface. Boom! The short martial artist seized the opportunity to flash out when the stone came crashing down once again. Thrusting out the Buddha curse blade again, he left another swastika mark on it. After repeating this move a number of times, each side of the enormous rocks had a swastika mark on its surface. Then, the short warrior suddenly took a step back, holding the Buddha curse blade. Staring at the giant rock, he chanted, "One word breaks all directions. Shatter." Buzz, buzz, buzz. The swastika marks on the surface of the square stone began spinning rapidly at the same time. Boom! An extremely strong force impacted the surface of the huge rock. In waves of the Buddhist light, countless sharp silhouettes shot straight at the huge rock's surface. What a powerful technique! Even Zen's face had turned solemn. This Buddha curse blade was also a supreme divine weapon, after all. It was different from the Black Star, because it was considered an offensive tool. It wasn't surprising that it had such overwhelming power. There was a law of causality within the supreme divine weapon. Would this Buddha curse blade be able to shatter the huge stone? While dodging the stone's crushing attacks, everyone made sure to pay attention to the short warrior's moves. Rumble, rumble, the huge rock actually stopped rolling. Did he make it? For a moment, Zen thought as his gaze froze. When the light dissipated, he saw that the huge rock was left completely undamaged. Meanwhile, a small grimace appeared on the surface of the huge rock once again. When everyone saw the ghost face, they were all stunned still. Suddenly, the ghost face changed as its strange smile faded away, turning its face into one that looked close to tears. Upon this sight, everyone's heart tightened. "Everyone, be careful," Janet warned them. Although they didn't know what kind of unforeseen problem they would face, they could tell that something bad was about to unfold. Simultaneously, a grimace appeared on the surface of all the square stones in the hall. "Don't go in a straight line with these stones," Zen warned, his eyes flashing as he took a step to the side. Just as Zen moved out of the way, beams of light shot out from the stones in 4 directions. Buzz, buzz, buzz. These square beams of light were 30 feet high and 30 feet wide, perfectly covering a line of squares on the ground, stretching all the way to the end of the hall. Each of these square stones released 4 square beams of light simultaneously. Since they intersected with each other, there wasn't much space for the martial artists to dodge. Standing in the middle of the square was Zen. Before him and behind him, the area filled with beams of light. The only options for him were to move to the left and right. These beams of light, they could kill once they are touched. Even though I've warned everyone, I don't know if everyone will be able to hold up. Making sure not to move recklessly at that moment, Zen had also given a warning. So long as he faced the square rock from the front, back, left, or right, the light beam would shine upon him. The light beams continued to shoot out. After about 30 seconds, the light gradually dimmed until it completely disappeared. After these beams disappeared, 2 balls of illusion points came floating into view. 2 people have been killed, Zen muttered with a twitch of his brows. 8 giant square stones connected to each other surrounded the 2 warriors. It looked like they were trapped in a danger zone with no escape. As the crowd saw the 2 balls of points, their hearts sank. 2 people had actually died during this round of light and they had yet to find a way to break it. The balls held quite a number of points. According to their calculations, each ball probably had at least 3 million points. At this time, though, no one was in the mood to absorb them. Boom, boom, boom. Soon after, the huge rocks began rolling again. But instead of chasing after everyone, they connected to each other in a row. If these stones were to form a row and shoot out the square beams of light, there would surely be no blind spots in the entire hall, everyone would be left for dead. There's no square stone there. Zen called out. Whoosh. As he sprinted horizontally, Zen roared. Here, everyone, come here. All too quickly, the situation changed, leaving no one any time to think. Janet and the 6 other warriors could only rush toward Zen as he called out to them. The moment the last warrior charged into the square where Zen was, the row of giant stones released square beams of light simultaneously. These square stones were connected to each other, stopping the release of beams from the left and right. But these beams of light from the front and back filled the entire hall of causality. There were no blind spots at all. In total, there were 43 square stones. But there were 44 rows of squares in the hall. The one square stone that was missing was the only chance of survival. The hall of causality could definitely be passed in a certain way, meaning that it wouldn't block this single chance of survival. Otherwise, it would be a death trap. Buzz, buzz, buzz. Everyone crowded with Zen before looking at the 2 sides that were densely covered with enormous beams of light. Their faces were all deathly pale. Apart from this place, every other place in the hall was already deadly. Under the beams of light, everyone finally had a chance to catch their breath. He shouldn't have attacked the stone just now, someone criticized the short warrior. But Zen interjected, no, I'm afraid if we want to pass through this hall, we'll probably have to do so. It was because of his attack that the attack of the Hall of Causality has evolved to this extent. If this short martial artist hadn't used the Buddha curse blade to attack the square stone, then everyone would have still been chased away by the stones without a way to break it. Well then, how are we supposed to break these stones? Everyone might die if we don't dodge in time. We can't just keep this up, right? Someone asked in worry. Taking a deep breath, Zen looked toward the depths of the Hall of Causality. Then, he said, the key is probably still those ghost faces. Chapter 1249, A Stupid Method. Over 30 seconds later, the square pillars of light disappeared once again. Simultaneously, all the giant stones began rolling one more time. Now that everyone clearly understood the rules of the stones' movement, they all felt slightly more at ease. These stones only rolled along the squares of the ground. So long as the squares where they stayed were not in line with the stones, they could avoid the pillar of light. Boom! With that, the stones were no longer arranged in a row but instead were scattered and rolled out in every direction. The 8 surviving warriors now followed the rolling of the stones, constantly adjusting their positions. We can stand here, don't stand there. A huge rock is rolling over. That place will be blocked soon. Come here. After the warriors found their new, safe spots, they stopped moving and quietly waited for the giant stones to shoot out the square pillars of light. Although the stones were all in a row just then, one row of squares were the safe spots. In this moment, all the square boulders were in chaos, their safety spot was split apart. Whoosh! As the boulders rolled, Zen didn't seem to be in a hurry to find his safe spot. Instead, he was shuttling back and forth between the boulders to examine them. Since a stone was attacked by the short martial artist from the blessed Buddha land, a grimace remained on each side of all the square-shaped boulders. The key must be in the grimaces, Zen spoke as his eyes frantically swept across the area. Boom! The moment all the boulders stopped rolling, Zen's eyes flashed. Is there something different about the grimace on this boulder? Albeit faint, he could see that the color of a grimace on the boulder was slightly different from the others. On the other boulders, the grimaces were simply black lines, but the one on the bottom of the square boulder before him was dark red in color. But just as Zen tried to move in closer, the stone turned over so that the red grimace was facing the ground. It was then impossible for Zen to lift it up and get a closer look. At this moment, all the boulders kept still. Left without a better choice, Zen had to give up and find a safe spot nearby. He stood firmly where he was and continued to ponder. Buzz buzz buzz. Light pillars shot out from the four sides of all the giant rocks simultaneously. The 43 giant, square rocks shot out a total of 172 light pillars in 4 different directions. Zen glanced at the terrifying might from within these pillars, and then he furrowed his brows and continued staring intently at the huge rock not far away. The light from the pillars lasted for about 30 seconds before they gradually dissipated. Following this, all the boulders began rolling again. Zen's eyes were still fixated on the huge square boulder which now rolled itself over to expose the side facing the ground. The dark red grimace, is it gone? Zen's brows knitted in confusion. The one clue he had gone through so much to find disappeared just like that. This time, all the huge rocks rolled toward one side of the hall. It became clear that they all wanted to line up in a row again. One is missing here, the ogre roared. The other warriors had no time to pay attention to anything else as they rushed toward that direction. And Zen was no exception. After the boulders connected in a row, the only safe spot was that single gap. The previously separated crowd stood together once again. Did you find anything? With that, Janet could tell that Zen was looking for a solution. At the bottom, Zen answered, there seems to be a dark red grimace, it's different from the others. Really? Janet's eyes lit up upon hearing this. Find that grimace and smash it into pieces. Although the tests in each hall of causality were different, one of the halls Janet had entered before was rather similar to this one. The key to working it out was finding a dragon sculpture among 33 stone pillars and breaking it into pieces. That dark red grimace seems to have been deliberately hidden by these huge rocks. They even know how to change position to hide it, Zen said, sounding helpless. Even if we find it, we won't be able to break it in time. You're right. Janet's small nose wrinkled slightly as she fell into deep thought. No matter what, let's find that dark red grimace first, a demon knight woman said. To that, everyone nodded their heads in agreement. After gradually getting used to the rhythm of the rolling boulders, everyone grew calmer. When the square boulders finally dispersed, they were no longer in a hurry to find a safe spot to stay safe. Instead, they kept getting closer to the square boulders. Because at that moment, the square boulders were no longer trying to crush them. Whoosh whoosh, one after another, figures began circling the enormous boulders. I saw it. It's this piece. There is indeed a dark red grimace. The ogre shouted out in excitement. But it was pressed down by this giant boulder. As the ogre finished speaking, all the boulders shot out square beams of light once again. Originally, Zen wanted to rush over, but the square beams of light in front of him blocked his path. Although he couldn't see the dark red grimace this time, he managed to prove his hypothesis, at least, he could be sure about that. The key definitely lay in the dark red grimace, but these giant boulders seemed to have their own thoughts. When they rolled, they would always hide the dark red grimace below them, and each of the 43 square boulders had 6 grimaces on them. That meant they had to find the red grimace among a total of 258 of them. This was not an easy task. Soon after, all the huge rocks once again lined up in a row, giving Zen and the others an opportunity to gather. Everyone's eyes met with each other, hoping that someone would think of a solution. I got one, but it's kind of stupid, Zen offered. Please tell us, the demon knight woman uttered. At that point, so long as Zen's suggestion didn't involve any risk of death, they would do anything. Who has the means to set up a trap? Zen asked the crowd. Hearing his words, the warrior wearing a round hat flicked the brim of his hat and smiled faintly. I can do it. With a gentle wave of his hand, 3 purple bamboos as thick as his little finger appeared in his hand. He sprinkled them lightly, and the purple bamboos fell to the ground and stood up on their own. They won't work at all. Zen shook his head. They're purple thunder bamboos. When they explode, the impact, the martial artist clearly wanted to continue going on about his bamboos, but Zen merely ignored him. How could he be willing to explain to this guy in such a rush? Under the crushing pressure of the boulders, the purple thunder bamboos would be easily crushed to pieces. What Zen needed was a trap similar to a divine texture. He had a suitable divine texture in his mind, but right now, it was impossible for him to inscribe one. At this moment, some of the warriors were still left confused, but Janet and the short martial artist got a good idea of what Zen was planning. As the square boulder continued to roll along, one side would eventually face the ground, covering the dark red grimace. Then, they could set up traps all over the floor of the hall. So long as the grimace could turn over, it would get caught up in the traps when they were activated at the same time. Although it seemed pretty stupid, it was an effective method. I can do that, Janet said with a smile. I can summon the lofty wood texture. With a flick of her fingers, a tiny bit of mysterious texture appeared on the two squares, one in front of her and the other behind. With only a single thought, she made thorns spread out from the texture. Such was one of Janet's most outstanding skills. I can do that too. The short martial artist offered a nod before clasping his hands together. A bolt of thunder from the palm of his hand struck the ground next to him, creating a texture of lighting onto the square. Not knowing where the square boulders would be moved, this foolish method was time-consuming and exhausting. Because it was necessary to fill in every square in the hall with traps. But no one could come up with a better idea. As they dodged, the two summoned their skills to set up traps on the squares of the ground, laying them out in rows. Chapter 1250. Shoot an arrow. The figures of Janet and the short martial artist were blur as they both moved at the speed of lightning. Both of their strength could be ranked in the team's top 3. Although the square pillars of light caused their speeds to slow down a bit, they had succeeded in setting up traps. There were now lines of traps on the floor from a side of the Hall of Causality. Janet had used something called the lofty wood texture. It was a profound mystery derived from the 5th level of the wood law. It was also one of her clan's extremely powerful techniques. Meanwhile, the thunder technique the short martial artist had used appeared to be extraordinary, which he hadn't explained. The two of them shuttled across the Hall of Causality just like that. Each of them would set up a trap each time reaching a square, and they had filled up 1/3 of the hall's area with traps within 5 minutes. Using their thurgies to set up traps had consumed lots of their strength. Thus, the two of them would rest for a while to replenish their life vitality as the pillars of light were released by the square boulders. This idiotic method consumed a great deal of life vitality, but they had no choice but to do so if they wanted to pass through this Hall of Causality. In any case, according to Zen's plan, the dark red grimace would definitely be crushed as long as that the traps covered the squares where all the giant rocks would go through, and that all the traps were activated at the same time. The others tried their best to help Janet and the short warrior while they dodged the rocks. For instance, the demon knight woman had tied a light green feather into Janet's hair, which was taken from the blue phoenix's head. It allowed one to move effortlessly, and it did save Janet a lot of strength. However, an unexpected change happened. Something happened when this grand project was halfway set up. A ray of black light spread from the squares in the hall and released a strange burst of power. The black light spread out from the ground, but didn't harm any of the martial artists in the hall. However, when it disappeared, so did the traps Janet and the short martial artist had set. What? Zen frowned deeply when he saw the scene. Meanwhile, Janet and the short martial artists were naturally upset. The other warriors simply remained silent. What had just happened meant that they weren't allowed to set traps in this Hall of Causality. Thus, the traps they had set up now were gone in a flash. Buzz buzz buzz. All the giant square boulders once again lined up in a row, and then released square beams of light. On the other hand, Janet was already familiar with the boulders' movement patterns. She calmly stepped forward, walked into the safe spot, and asked Zen what to do next. At that moment, Zen was deep in thought. This Hall of Causality definitely had a method to work it out, but he just hadn't figured it out. When the huge rocks rolled, they actually had the opportunity to attack the dark red grimace hiding at the bottom. There were 43 rocks, but the team only had 8 people. If each of them chose a boulder to guard, they would only have a 1 in 5 chance of coming into contact with the dark red grimace. As long as the dark red grimace appeared and the giant rock did not turn over, they would have the chance to destroy it. This plan was even more stupid than the previous one. However, they had no choice. Everyone was willing to spend 5 million illusion points to come here to have a single gamble, so no one wanted to quit right now. After Zen had proposed his plan, the others had been very cooperative and did as he said. Everyone picked a huge rock and waited for the rocks to disperse. Before the light pillars shot out, everyone's attention shifted to the huge rock they chose and they began to check every side of the rolling rock. Zen had already taken out his dark golden longbow and got ready. He would shoot an arrow the moment his sharp eyes saw the dark red grimace appear in one of the rolling rocks. Nothing. This one is nothing here. Boom, boom, boom. As soon as they spoke, all the square boulders stopped rolling and began to emit square beams of light. Even if the dark red grimace appeared at this moment, Zen and the others couldn't do anything to it at all. After all, neither Zen nor the other warriors were able to flip the square boulder over. They could only wait for the next opportunity. The square boulders spread out, and then gathered in a row and spread out again. Try again. They found it extremely difficult to destroy the dark red grimace. First of all, they only had a 1/5 chance of finding the grimace, and they had to make their move before the square-shaped boulder turned over. However, none of them were discouraged. Found it. This time, it was the ogre who had found the grimace. The others' eyes were focused on the boulder beside him after they heard his shout. Suddenly, they all heard the sound of a bow being drawn at the same time. An arrow shot towards the enormous boulder at a high speed. The arrow came from Zen, who had the fastest reaction time. Just as the ogre's voice rang out, Zen's right hand, which already gripped the bowstring, quickly loosened. However, a sharp sword light simultaneously shot out from another direction. The square boulder had already been half rolled over, and the dark red grimace would be covered below again as long as the boulder tilted forward. The two attacks were extremely fast and were about to pierce into the rock that hadn't completely turned over yet. Garbage. Zen and the short martial artist were both dumbstruck. Just then, the streak of sword light coincidentally collided with the black arrow. Pock! The two attacks collided with a clear and loud sound, and a refraction occurred. The black arrow flew up towards the ceiling, while the sword light nailed itself to the side of the boulder. Regret crossed everyone's faces when they all saw what happened. In particular, the ogre bitterly said, it was very difficult to find this dark red grimace. If it had been just one person who had taken action, perhaps they would have passed the Hall of Causality. The short martial artist just smiled faintly. It doesn't matter. There is always a chance, he said lightly. The giant rocks rolled again and changed directions while everyone followed their movements. However, they couldn't find the dark red grimace for the next 4 times. On the 5th time, Zen felt slightly annoyed as he stared at the huge rock in front of him. When the boulder flipped over, his face turned sour. He still didn't find the grimace. The woman from the Demon Knight, who was not far ahead of him, suddenly pointed at the space behind Zen. Over there. Zen turned his head on reflex as soon as he heard her, but he didn't have the time to adjust his longbow because of panic. Besides, the opportunity to attack the dark red grimace only lasted for a blink of an eye. When Zen turned around, his right hand had already released the bowstring, but it didn't matter whether he had shot in the right direction, because he had grabbed onto a small skull on his right shoulder and thrown it at the giant boulder, as if he was acting on a conditioned reflex. The moment the square-shaped boulder turned over, Zen had succeeded in throwing the small skull into the bottom. Boom! A muffled bang followed, then everyone saw that the square boulder could no longer turn over now. Even though the square boulder was unimaginably heavy, it didn't manage to crush the small skull into pieces. The small skull had actually stopped the boulder from turning just like that. Be careful of that light beam, Janet shouted from not far away. At that point, Zen was still in the same direction where the light shot out from the square boulder. If the square-shaped light beam had hit him, he would undoubtedly die. There was a dull thud on the ground. Zen had apparently collapsed. Buzz buzz buzz. Since the small skull was under the giant boulder, the light pillar that shot out from the boulder was tilted upwards. Zen had managed to dodge the square pillar of light, but he fell face flat onto the ground. While Zen was in that position, he took out another black arrow from his quiver. The square pillars of light would continue for a few more seconds, so Zen had plenty of time now. His lips curved into a smile as he stared at the dark red grimace. Bow, aim, shoot. Swish. This black arrow whizzed out and was aimed at the grimace along the bottom, which the small skull had held up. Even then, Zen was still a little worried. After all, he wasn't sure if the dark red grimace was the crux of passing through this Hall of Causality. It was merely their own speculation. Boom! The arrow flew right off and directly nailed itself onto the dark red grimace. At that moment, all of the light pillars simultaneously came to a halt, and the entire Hall of Causality returned to its calmness. Chapter 1251, Reward. The dark red ghost face was nailed in and started cracking. The cracks spread quickly until they completely engulfed the entirety of the stone's surface. These huge blocks of stones were originally ordinary stones. But their surfaces were protected by extremely strong law of causality which prevented them from being broken. This was the reason why no matter how powerful a battle between warriors was, the walls of the main cities would never be broken. I was scared to death, the ogre murmured weakly. Zen had shot an arrow just now that missed him by mere millimeters. Sorry about that, Zen apologized with a smile. Everything was so chaotic and he couldn't really think straight when he launched his arrow. The ogre laughed. It's all right, at least we can finally get through this hall. There wasn't really any harm done, and even if the arrow did hit him, it still wouldn't be deadly. Zen's bow was obtained from the lower world and could only be considered a lower-ranked divine weapon, meaning it was no match to the ogre warrior's armor. The ogre turned to the idle stone beside him. He patted it gently and the stone immediately exploded into smithereens. They had previously been chased by these stones all over the place, but the tables had turned and they were now able to smash them all into pieces. Amazing, Janet told Zen with a sweet smile. Zen shrugged and pulled a skull from his back. I was just lucky. I didn't expect this little skull to be useful. He never thought that this indestructible annoyance was going to come in handy at such a crucial moment. Back in the first hall, Zen had almost caused the death of several warriors, so a lot of them harbored a lot of anger towards him. However, his actions here in the second hall proved to be extremely effective in getting through the challenges. He went from dead weight to an accidental hero. This temporary team was sure to bond even more once they got through more challenges together. Bang, bang, bang. More than 40 blocks of stone had been smashed and reduced to rubble. Once all stones were gone, the warriors now fixed their eyes upon a very interesting sight. Two masses of illusion points that gathered in the middle of the hall, left behind by the two warriors who died under the strong square light pillars. Since they weren't killed by another warrior, the illusion points could be considered free game. The warriors looked at the points, and then at each other. There were probably millions of illusion points just waiting to be claimed on the floor. It wasn't a small number at all. However, they were faced with the dilemma of allocating these points amongst themselves. Thad should get half of the illusion points, Janet quickly declared in a non-negotiable voice. The short warrior nodded in agreement. Okay, then we can share the rest equally. The warrior wearing the round hat opened his mouth. Why should he? Janet and the short warrior shot him nasty glares, silencing him before he could even finish his sentence. Zen was the one who contributed the most to help them get through the second hall, so it was only right that he got the most number of illusion points. Glad that things turned out in his favor, Zen quickly walked towards the mass of illusion points and absorbed half. These points could be considered additional income, perhaps even as a sort of inheritance from the dead warriors. Meanwhile, the rest of the group quickly reached an agreement and absorbed their allocated illusion points one by one. Cheating wasn't a possibility, since anyone who broke the deal and tried to absorb more than their share would get viciously attacked by the others. After absorbing the illusion points, the group then advanced towards the end of the Hall of Causality. The white light grates, which previously blocked them, had now disappeared. However, a huge, square stone still blocked their way. The sight stumped all of them. Why is this stone here? I don't know. Why? Let me deal with it. The ogre had just recently broken around 15 of these huge stones. Figuring that this one wasn't going to be that different, he confidently walked towards it and struck its sides with both palms concentrated with destructive energy. Puff! Everyone expected the stone to shatter just as the other stones did. However, it simply sat there, still whole and very much undamaged. The sight made everyone frown. They had already broken the rules of the heavens, so this huge block of stone should have shattered the moment the ogre struck it. Why was it completely unharmed by the blow? Was it still perhaps shrouded in the invisible power of law? If that was the case, then how were they ever going to get through? What's going on? This stone, I can't destroy it. But before he could even finish his words, the stone's surface suddenly started to glow a faint, yellow light. The yellow light then separated into numerous yellow dots that immediately flew towards the ogre's body. How can there be so many illusion points coming out? And he was right to ask. The number of points wasn't small at all. With just that one strike, the ogre had been able to obtain nearly 400,000 illusion points. Everyone watched this with great interest. If I'm not wrong, this may be the second hall's reward. Everyone can get the reward, but the amount is dependent on the amount of power the warrior displays, Janet explained. Ah, the ogre's eyes widened in shock. No, I should have another try. When he struck the stone, he only used around half of his power, since all he really wanted was to shatter it like the rest of the stones inside the hall. If he was able to get 400,000 points with just half of his strength, then that meant he could have gotten so much more if he went in with full power. Boom! There was a loud bang as the ogre punched the stone with a force much powerful than before. However, no more illusion points came out of the stone. Everyone stood there with looks of pity on their faces, but there was no going about it. The ogre had his turn and got only 400,000 points out of it. The ogre silently retreated to the side in resentment, clearly regretting his rash decision of attacking the stone so impulsively. Now it was the others' turn to give it a try. The demon knight warrior stood in front of the stone. They all understood that they should use their most destructive methods to attack the stone. They would have to bring out the big guns and attack this stone with everything they had got in order to reap its huge rewards. The Demon Knight warrior took a few seconds to think of her strategy in dealing with this stone. Once she made up her mind, she took 2 steps back and took out a fiery red longbow. This bow, is it also a supreme divine weapon? Zen hadn't really been paying much attention to this woman. She was silent and preferred to keep to herself. The only interaction she ever did with any of them was when she gave the blue phoenix feather to Janet. If she was in possession of a supreme divine weapon, then that meant that she enjoyed a high status in their race, perhaps even higher than Aurora's. The woman skillfully gripped the bow and pulled on the bowstring, aiming it at the stone. There's no arrow though, Zen thought to himself. But soon enough, the fiery red longbow started to glow as some kind of powerful energy surged through it. Not long after, a vortex of fire appeared in front of the bow and spat out a crimson arrow. This is the moon-bursting flame bow, ranked a bit below the 2100th on the Universe Spirit Tablet, Janet helpfully explained to Zen. At that moment, the Demon Knight woman quickly released her hold on the bowstring and sent the arrow flying straight to the stone. Chapter 1252, Various Skills. After she let go of the bowstring, a buzz was heard. Everyone saw the bowstring tremble on the bow. The vortex of flame floating in front of the longbow didn't shoot out but instead floated in front of her, slowly spinning. The Demon Knight woman then smiled shyly at the crowd. We'd better back off a bit. Upon seeing the power of the flame vortex, everyone knew that the power of the explosion would exceed their imagination and that they had to retreat. Putting away her moon-bursting flame bow, the Demon Knight woman retreated toward the hall with the others. The vortex of flame was then left where it was, slowly rotating in the air. Zen, Janet and the others moved back hundreds of feet before they decided to stop. It's not yet enough. We have to retreat further back. I'm afraid it'll hurt you, the Demon Knight woman said with a smile. Thus, the group retreated together with her to the middle section of the Hall of Causality. All right, it's enough. As soon as the woman finished speaking, her eyes flashed. In that moment, everyone heard the sound of an explosion. Boom! The flame vortex shot toward the huge, square rock. After a fierce collision, the flame power contained within spread out to the back. Almost half of the Hall of Causality was easily swallowed by the intense flame. The woman seemed rather familiar with the bow. She told everyone to back off, but not too far away. They were at a good distance now. In addition to the power of the 5 layers of the fire law, it also contains a strange law of causality. It can condense the flame power to a high degree. Is this what makes the moon-bursting flame bow special? Janet whispered. Right in the middle of the raging flames, the surface of the huge rock was once again suffused with countless illusion points. As they continuously danced in the air, they flew directly toward the Demon Knight woman's body. The number of these illusion points was several times more than that of the ogre martial artists from before. When the raging flames completely dissipated and the illusion points were completely absorbed, the ogre martial artist anxiously asked, How many illusion points have you obtained? 2.8 million, she said with a faint smile. What? The ogre martial artist roared. In this moment, he turned green with envy. But there was no medicine for regret in this world, he shouldn't have struck the square rock. As the other martial artists heard the woman's words, their hearts burned with passion. And it was as expected. Just as Janet said, it was rather easy to earn the illusion points in the Hall of Causality. They had only passed the second hall and yet the Demon Knight woman already managed to acquire such a large number of points. What would happen in the next halls, then? So that's how it is. It'll be difficult to maintain my ranking just by robbing other martial artists of their illusion points. If I want to obtain a good ranking, I guess I have to enter the other halls of causality, Zen thought to himself. After the flames dissipated, the other martial artists rushed toward the square rock. Then, a human martial artist launched an attack on it. Since he knew the rules, he didn't bother holding himself back at all. Instead, he used all his strength to unleash his strongest martial skills toward the rock. While he was indeed powerful, he didn't have a supreme divine weapon. The number of illusion points he could obtain from the rock wasn't as big as that of the Demon Knight woman, but he still had at least 1 million. Meanwhile, the ogre martial artist wailed again. Everyone present took turns attacking the square rock. There, everyone could obtain over 1 million illusion points. Every time a warrior absorbed the points, they would hear a wail. The first few martial artists received their rewards. At this point, Janet appeared in front of the rock, wearing a confident smile. But she didn't bring out any magical weapons. Instead, she merely held her 2 small hands together and gently rotated them in the opposite direction, emitting a special aura from her palms. Soon after, she gently patted the square rock. Crack! A crisp sound resounded as if she just smacked the rock. The ogre martial artist's eyes were wide open as he looked at Janet and said, "Don't you want the illusion points?" The ogre martial artist didn't feel any particularly intense strength, so he couldn't understand why Janet was acting this way. But as he thought that Janet wouldn't obtain as many points as he did, he found a sense of comfort. Without a word, Janet smiled. Zen, the short martial artist, and the demon knight woman all looked surprised at Janet's display. To them, it was obvious that her palm strike was nothing ordinary. Soon after, the square rock began emitting yellow illusion points, one after another. With this scene, the ogre martial artist laughed out loud. Maybe you can only obtain 100 illusion points. But just then, he stopped laughing. More and more points were flying out. 3.1 million illusion points. Not bad. Janet smiled faintly at Zen before backing away to the side, leaving the ogre martial artist standing there in a daze. Of the 8 people, 6 of them had absorbed varying numbers of illusion points, leaving only Zen and the short martial artist. After the two looked at each other, the short martial artist was the first to step forward. This time, let me do it. This warrior had the Buddha curse blade, so everyone expected him to obtain a massive amount of points. But much to everyone's surprise, he didn't plan to use his supreme divine weapon. Instead, he stood in front of the square rock with his hands clasped together. After closing his eyes, he didn't move at all. "What's this guy doing?" the ogre martial artist whispered. But no one else said another word. The giant rock before them rewarded the number of illusion points based on the power of each attack, so the warriors naturally scrambled to display their most powerful moves. These geniuses cooperated with each other temporarily in the Hall of Causality, but once they left, given their strength, they would meet each other sooner or later. It was beneficial for all parties to get an idea of each other's trump cards in advance, after all. When the short martial artist closed his eyes, he looked like a meditative old monk, even his aura turned tranquil and serene. At this moment, he seemed to have forgotten all about time and space, he moved like he was the only person in the hall. After a few minutes of silence, everyone heard a sigh. It was almost unbearably desolate, as if it came from someone who had seen right into the emptiness of the material world. Alas! After heaving the sigh, the short martial artist gently reached out his hand and pushed it toward the square rock. As he did, the push seemed relaxed and gentle. When Janet struck the surface of the rock, it made a loud sound, but his strike was silent. The moment his palm touched the rock, he pulled back like a dragonfly dipping quickly into the water. But after his light push, a massive amount of illusion points flooded into him. That's a strange power. The methods of the blessed Buddha land are truly extensive and profound. Sighing inwardly, Zen shot the martial artist with a grave expression. The 3 human forces in the universe were all very powerful. The Thoughtless Minds was established by many clans, while the Humanity Alliance was made of countless sacred places. But the blessed Buddha land was the oldest in the whole human race. Their path of cultivation was completely differently from that of the Thoughtless Minds and Humanity Alliance because they inherited the very teachings of the Buddhas. 3.9 million illusion points, he announced casually. The crowd couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air upon hearing the number. It wasn't the number they were shocked at. Over 4 million illusion points were stored in their bodies, after all. But the short martial artist managed to obtain nearly 4 million illusion points in one go. Did that mean his palm strike was several times stronger than theirs? The demon knight woman had used a supreme divine weapon and yet earned only 2.8 million illusion points. But this person, out of nowhere, earned 3.9 million using just his bare hands. Janet's mouth twitched. The record she created was instantly broken by the guy. Unwilling to give up, she turned to Zen. "It's your turn." In her frustration, she found herself hoping that Thad could get more illusion points than the short martial artist. Chapter 1253, Names. When the short warrior stepped aside to make way for Zen, everyone's eyes fell on the latter. He was the only one out of the remaining 8 warriors who had yet to attack the massive rock. Giving Janet a soft smile, he walked toward the square rock. All eyes were focused on him as the other warriors wondered what method he would use to attack. But when Zen took his stance, everyone's expression turned disappointed. Zen merely took on a horse stance, clenching his right fist as he stared straight ahead at the rock in front of him. It seemed as though he was preparing for a normal punch. Doesn't he care about illusion points at all? They wondered. Although the short warrior's palm strike just then seemed ordinary, they could tell that it was composed of profound skills. The control he had over his strength was already at such a high level that his attack looked so leisurely from a close distance. "Thad, are you really going to hit the rock with just your fist?" Don't you want to use a weapon? Janet asked. Janet couldn't help but suggest that he use a weapon, believing it would help him gain more points. But Zen only shook his head. There is no need. Though he understood Janet's doubt, he couldn't be bothered to explain further. After activating all the 40,000 dragon scales, the strength of his physical body was probably comparable to the might of the god's intimidating strike. But his physical strength had its own limitations. Warriors rarely engaged in close combat during a fight, urging him to use the god's intimidating strike and other skills more often. After all the power of the dragon scales flowed into his right fist, he threw a rather ordinary punch. But no one knew exactly how terrifying the power in this punch was. When Zen's fist landed on the surface of the square rock, everyone heard a dull thud. "Ha, looks like he's at the bottom of us all." The ogre warrior grinned and remarked from behind. Like Zen, he attacked the rock with merely an ordinary punch, obtaining only around 400,000 illusion points. As an ogre, his natural physical strength was already much stronger than an ordinary human warrior's. Even though he had used less than 60% of his full strength, he felt rather confident that his strength still surpassed this human warrior's. But after Zen retracted his fist, several spots of the illusion points started to fly out of the rock like before. 1, 2. These yellow luminous spots were like fireflies dancing in the air as they radiated from the surface of the rock. Everyone stared at these spots, their faces gradually growing in doubt. After a few moments, only several hundred illusion points were emitted from the rock. It was a much smaller number than anyone had expected. But Zen didn't look nervous at all and merely stared indifferently at the rock in front of him. "Even though you want to be at the bottom, you don't have to do that badly, my friend. This is too miserable." The ogre warrior snorted and burst out laughing. Clearly, his mood had lifted. Though Zen attacked the rock in deadly earnest, he obtained only a few hundred illusion points. Such a number could only be described as miserable. But before the ogre was done laughing, several yellow specks of light suddenly flashed out from all directions of the square rock. It was as if Zen poked a hornet's nest. The specks of light swarmed out like hornets, forming a river of light that flowed continuously into Zen. While the broad grin remained glued to the ogre warrior's face, complacency quickly disappeared from his eyes. His mouth was still wide open as his expression turned from disdain to surprise. "What? Why, this?" So surprised, he couldn't even form a complete sentence. The others were also staring blankly at Zen as they watched the river of illusion points flowing toward him. All of them were transfixed with astonishment. Janet and the short warrior also found their eyes widening in shock at the scene. Their gazes turned to Zen with solemnity. They were certain that Zen hadn't used any martial skills just then. All he used was a straight jab that any warrior could execute. To obtain so many illusion points from the rock with a single punch meant only one thing: Zen's physical strength had already reached an unimaginable degree. Swish, swish, swish. Countless illusion points continued flowing into Zen's body. The other warriors all turned envious of the great flow of points. Originally, they were already content obtaining several million illusion points. But now that Zen was absorbing such a vast amount of points, the rest grew frustrated. Although they had all faced the same danger in the Hall of Causality, the difference in their rewards was just too great. Estimating the number of illusion points Zen earned, it was probably 10 times greater than what they had obtained. But no one could deny that the opportunity was indeed fair. All had a chance to earn their points. Since they earned so little compared to Zen, they only had themselves to blame for not attacking the rock harder. On another thought, they realized something else. Since Zen had acquired 10 times as many illusion points as them, did it mean that Zen's strength was also 10 times as strong as theirs? They thought it was impossible. All of them were core geniuses of their races. How could they actually admit that they were weaker than someone else? The large gap in points hurt their pride. Too many factors could affect the outcome of a fight between warriors, after all. It was impossible for the gap between their and Zen's strength to be that wide. But a problem remained: Zen had only used one punch. Obviously, that wasn't his trump card. As they pondered on this thought, they increasingly felt that Zen was too unfathomable. After absorbing all the illusion points, Zen closed his eyes for a while and checked the number. When he opened his eyes again, the ogre warrior anxiously asked, How many points did you get?" 10.4 million, Zen replied flatly. "What, 10 million? The ogre exclaimed hysterically. This number far exceeded anyone's imagination. The number of points the ogre had obtained earlier was merely a tiny fraction of this huge number. "I've already used my full strength after employing the Buddhist theurgy. Even in the blessed Buddha land where geniuses are common, there are very few who could surpass me, but this guy's physical strength alone is 3 times stronger than mine, uttered the short warrior to himself. Upon witnessing the scene, he estimated the gap of strength between him and Zen from the number of illusion points. Janet, on the other hand, only remained silent at this moment. Wearing a smile, she looked at Zen with deep interest. Since Zen had absorbed 10 million illusion points at once, the total number of illusion points in his body rapidly increased. After paying 5 million illusion points earlier, his ranking dropped from the upper part of the pyramid. But with this flow of points, his rank skyrocketed once again. In the entirety of the illusion battlefield, he now ranked 9,200th among all the warriors. In the present Supreme World, his ranking had reached up to the top 100. With that one move, he managed to earn back the 5 million points he paid and more. Since he was the last attack, cracks suddenly appeared on the surface of the square rock until it became a mere pile of dust. Everyone sighed as they looked ahead to their upcoming journey. Just at the second hall of causality, they had obtained such a large number of illusion points. What could possibly happen next? Although there was hope there, they also had rather big worries. The difficulty of the second hall of causality wasn't low by any means. 2 people had already been killed here. What could happen in the third hall of causality? After passing through the hall's exit, they once again stepped onto the stairs and continued up the mountain. On their way, Janet suddenly broke the silence and offered, "Let's introduce ourselves to each other. We need cooperation to pass through these halls, after all. We should at least know each other's names, right?" Through their previous cooperation, they had accepted each other as mere temporary companions. But after everything they had to go through, the trust they had in each other leveled up. Hearing Janet's words, the short warrior from the blessed Buddha land replied first, "My name is Jeffrey Jin." "Jeffrey, are you that famous monk in the blessed Buddha land?" Hearing his name, a human warrior behind him inquired, sounding surprised. With a smile, Jeffrey offered a nod. "Yes, that's me. I'm Thad Luo," Zen added. "I'm Coleman," the ogre replied loudly. The demon knight woman blinked softly and said, "My name is Haley." After everyone introduced themselves, Janet smiled and said, "You are all very honest. Only Thad used a fake name." Chapter 1254, Hooks. Janet had a special ability. She could distinguish if one was telling lies or not. When she declared that Thad was a fake name, everyone stared at Zen once again. However, Zen simply smiled and didn't explain. He believed that they shouldn't be too entangled with this issue. They continued climbing up the mountain. Zen scanned his surroundings, and an icy blue hall appeared in front of him. It seemed that the great hall in front of him was built from blue crystals, which made it glimmer with an icy blue luster under the light. Moreover, they felt refreshed as they drew closer to the hall. The soles of Jeffrey's shoes scuffed against the ground when he slowed down his pace and turned to Janet. "How difficult is the third hall of causality?" he asked her. In turn, Janet looked at the hall for a while with a serious expression. "Every hall of causality is different, so I can't say for sure, but there are 5 halls of causality from the foot of the mountain to its summit in total. We had 2 ace talents in the group last time I entered here. No one died in the first hall of causality. 3 people perished in the second. 4 more followed in the third. I perished in the 4th hall of causality. So many people had died even though you had 2 ace talents in the group." The ogre martial artist couldn't help but gawk at her in disbelief. There was not a single ace talent among the 10 people present. Although they had never fought each other before, Zen, Jeffrey, and Janet were undoubtedly the top 3 warriors among them. However, they thought that while Zen and the others weren't weak, they were not on par with the ace talents. Those who were called ace talents must have the greatest fortune in the universe. Not only did they carry the destiny of the chaotic world, a race or clan's hopes depended on them as well. If even a team with 2 ace talents did not make through the Hall of Causality, then it meant that this Hall of Causality was much more difficult than they had imagined. Naturally, some of the 8 people wanted to retreat after they heard Janet's words. However, Janet smiled at them and said, "Don't worry, isn't our result now better than last time? We'll definitely pass through this Hall of Causality as long as all of us work together." She made sure to emphasize the 2 words, "work together," as she spoke. What Janet didn't mention was that the 2 ace talents from the last time she had entered the Hall of Causality refused to cooperate. They always fought internally, and even continued their fight on the mountain. Furthermore, they didn't even save the other martial artists in danger when they saw them at all. If that hadn't been the case, the 10 of them most likely would have passed through the 5th Hall of Causality last time. That was also why Janet emphasized teamwork from the very beginning, and thus their team performed better than the previous one. At the very least, only 2 people died in the second hall of causality. Janet is right. If we want to get more illusion points, we must cooperate with each other. Otherwise, no one will get far. But if we do, we might be able to get into the top 1000 this time. Zen let out a hearty chuckle and joined in. Everyone, come on. Let's go in. After that, Zen took the lead and walked into the large hall. The hall's interiors were the same color as its exterior. From the ground, the ceiling, the columns, to even the walls on both sides of the hall were all an ice blue hue. Some of them touched the column and found it soothingly cool. This hall of causality is really pretty, Janet sighed as she raised her head and looked around. However, Zen and the others didn't feel the same way. Women were naturally interested in beautiful things. Even the woman from the Demon Knight named Haley was the same. A few minutes had passed. The crowd hadn't walked that far in the hall of causality before they abruptly stopped. It wasn't that they didn't want to advance, but rather, they couldn't. A ravine 3,000 feet wide was in front of them. There was a strange stream of colors in the deep ravine, which was actually a flow of pure energy. Coleman stood at the edge of the ravine, stretched his neck and looked down. He looked ahead and said, if we fall down, we'll probably be sent back directly to the main city. How can we cross it? It was only 1,000 feet wide ravine. Normally, everyone should be able to fly through even a 100,000 feet wide ravine. The problem was, it was now forbidden to fly in the Hall of Causality. Maybe we could jump over there, Jeffrey said as he looked into the distance. You're right, it's not a big problem, Zen nodded. It wasn't difficult to sprint across a distance of 3,000 feet. But since this deep ravine had suddenly appeared in front of them, they couldn't just test their jumping abilities. Simply rushing in recklessly might just result in their deaths. It was like when they were in the second hall of causality. Everyone had quickly gone to the end of the hall but found a white grating that stood in front of them, blocking their path. There seems to be something over there, Janet said and pointed to the left side of the hall. Zen looked in the direction Janet was pointing, and saw 10 icy blue stone tablets erected at the corner of the hall. He took a closer look through an icy blue stone tablet, and found a hook inside it. Why are there so many hooks? The ogre martial artist asked curiously. There was a long hook sealed within each of the 10 stone tablets in front of them. At the end of each hook was a thin string of chains that were coiled together to an unknown length. 10, Zen thought as he stared at the tablets. Then, he reached out and smacked one of them. Theoretically speaking, rules of the heavens in the Hall of Causality stated that nothing in the hall could be broken. However, Zen discovered that the tablet was incredibly brittle after he had smacked it. The large stone tablet then turned into a sparkling, translucent powder that scattered into the air, and the hook sealed inside it fell out. This hook, Zen nimbly picked it up and tugged at the chain at the back of the hook. Although the chain was only as thick as a pinky finger, it didn't budge at all even under Zen's strength. It couldn't be broken either. There is indeed the protection of the heavens, rules. This hook cannot be broken, Zen said. Clang, 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 clang. Everyone followed suit when they saw Zen shatter the stone tablet and took out the hook inside it. The answer was getting clearer and clearer. These beautifully shaped hooks were prepared for them. The group that challenged the Hall of Causality originally had to gather 10 people, but with 2 people dead, no one would take the hooks in the remaining 2 stone tablets. Coleman had smashed a tablet and gotten a hook. However, he was not satisfied. His gaze once again fell on the remaining 2 stone tablets. He tried to smash the 2 stone tablets to pieces, but they didn't even move an inch. They were completely unbreakable. From the looks of it, it seemed that each person could only get 1 hook. After everyone had obtained a hook, all of them turned to Janet once again. On the other hand, Janet innocently looked at Zen and muttered, I also don't know what to do next. Zen's lips curved up into a small smile. He walked towards the deep ravine's edge as he looked on the other side. The opposite end of the deep ravine was shrouded in darkness, so they couldn't see whatever was in there clearly. However, Zen's pupils shone with a green luster, and the black shadows on the other side gradually dissipated. Then, he saw some shadows that were shaking in the darkness. There seems to be something on the other side, said Zen. What is it? Janet immediately asked. Before the rules had been made clear, everyone had been unsure of their actions in the Hall of Causality. They might be killed instantly if they weren't careful, so all of them were quite nervous. I can't see it clearly, Zen said as the green light in his eyes glowed brighter. When he activated his vision ability, his expression suddenly changed and he shouted, watch out. Just as when he finished his words, a hook from the darkness in the other side of the deep ravine rapidly shot towards them. Everyone heeded Zen's warning and quickly moved to the two sides, but the hook was fast. It instantly crossed the distance of 3,000 feet, and directly hung itself on the body of a human martial artist named Kane Lee. After Kane was caught, he seemed powerless and couldn't resist at all. He only had enough time to scream for help, before he was pulled to the other side. Chapter 1255, The Warriors in the Darkness. That human warrior called Kane had been hooked and was immediately dragged off into the enveloping darkness. No sign of him could be seen, not even a shadow in the murky darkness. "Ah!" Kane shouted desperately, but then his shouting abruptly stopped. Everyone saw a mass of yellow light dots suddenly burst out from the darkness on the other side of the deep ditch. It was obvious that Kane had died. Half of his illusion points had burst forth from his body. The moment those illusion points appeared, he disappeared, as if he was immediately consumed by the darkness. Where are the illusion points? It seems that they have already been absorbed. This is impossible. Janet's face revealed an expression of surprise and horror. In this hall of causality, is there a warrior of some kind that could have killed Kane and absorbed the illusion points? In the illusion battlefield, only warriors could absorb illusion points from each other. The wild animals and dreaded beasts could kill the warriors, but couldn't absorb their illusion points. If Zen killed Kane, then no matter how far away they were from each other, Kane's illusion points would fly towards Zen. Lucille had once given her subordinates the golden suicide pellets that could take their lives. These golden pellets had contained Lucille's consciousness within them though. As a result, when her subordinates committed suicide, it was as if Lucille had killed them in the illusion battlefield. So she had obtained their illusion points. Some warriors who were killed by vicious beasts in the secret lands or out in the wilderness would have their illusion points float on the spot and become illusion points belonging to no one. Any warrior who found these points could absorb them, but those vicious beasts could never absorb the illusion points. However, after Kane was dragged away and slain, his illusion points were almost instantly absorbed. There was only one possibility: there were warriors hiding on the other side of ravine. These warriors on the other side had hooked Kane and dragged him away, after which they killed him and absorbed his illusion points. Every time the Hall of Causality opened, only 10 warriors could enter at the same time. How then were there warriors on the other side of the ditch? It didn't make any sense at all. Be careful. Zen also frowned. The hook in his hand was tightly held in his grip, while his eyes turned a motley green. Even though he had activated his magical eyes, he was still unable to see into the darkness. It seemed that someone had made use of the dark law to create the darkness, and it was as if the darkness was a curtain that protected and hid the warriors within it. It's the power of the dark law, and those opponents have made full preparation this time, Jeffrey said coldly. He held a hook in one hand and the Buddha curse blade in the other. Zen kept glancing around the darkness, and he finally tracked down one of the blurry shadows. When they had stepped into this hall, the hooks were neatly arranged to the side, and there were enough for all of the warriors. The purpose was obvious. Since the warriors on the other side of the deep ditch could hook them over, Zen could respond in kind. Now is the time. After aiming at the target, Zen hurled the hook forward and it flew straight towards the other side. Swoosh. Although the moving speed of the hook was extremely high, the creatures on the other side seemed to be highly experienced. Thus, they continuously moved around the edge of the deep ditch, making it difficult to target them. None of them has been hooked. Zen frowned as he reached out with a tug and pulled his hook back from the other side. Just as Zen was retrieving his hook, his eyebrows raised. Be careful, Haley. However, it was already too late. He had barely spoken his warning, when another hook came hurtling out of the darkness. It quickly latched onto Haley and pulled her towards the other side of the deep ditch. Actually, when Kane had been hooked earlier, Zen had noticed that the hook itself wasn't able to directly injure anyone. But once it caught someone, it seemed to create an irresistible force and instantly wrapped around the warrior, pulling him towards the other side. When he saw that Haley had been hooked and was about to be pulled into the darkness, a determined glint flashed in Zen's eyes. The hook that he had just withdrawn once again shot towards the other side. Swish. This time, he didn't try to catch any of the shadows in the darkness, but he instead let the hook fly towards Haley and hooked her. As Haley entered into the darkness, she felt a strong threat and prepared to counterattack. But at that moment, another hook wrapped around her body, pulling her back. That was close. Seeing that Haley was fine, Janet and the others let out a combined sigh of relief. Dang it. Those guys on the other side of the ditch are hiding in the darkness, so how can we attack and defeat them? It's not fair at all. The ogre warrior coldly muttered, raising the hook in his hand and glaring across to the other side of the ditch. Haley had been careless earlier and had been caught by the warriors on the other side. At this moment, she felt lucky that she had escaped. After Haley was pulled back to safety by Zen, she nodded slightly in thanks at him. Then, an angry expression appeared on her delicate face, and she glared at the shadows in the darkness. There are indeed strange warriors on the other side. After she finished speaking, she suddenly took out the moon-bursting flame bow. She wildly drew out the life vitality from within her body, and a vortex of silver flames appeared in front of her. She was ready to launch her fiercest counterattack. Whoosh! As Haley condensed the vortex of flame, another hook shot toward her from the darkness. After being hooked once, Haley naturally wouldn't let this happen a second time. Grabbing the moon-bursting flame bow, she coldly snorted in contempt. With a twist of her body, she swayed aside slightly, while she also began to release the bowstring from between her fingers. Whoosh! The wildly rolling vortex of flame shot directly towards the other side of the deep ditch. Witnessing this scene, Zen, Jeffrey, Janet, and the others also fixed their gazes on the opposite side. If the flames that Haley had fired were to explode on the other side, they might be able to see and locate their opponents, thereby obtaining a victory. Boom! The fierce silver flames from the vortex clearly illuminated the other side of the deep ditch, displaying their enemy in a bright silver light which cast ghoulish shadows behind them. Then, Zen and the others finally saw with clarity that there were 10 warriors standing on the other side. Each of them was holding a hook in their hands as they gazed at Zen and the others with unkind smiles plastered on their faces. Although the power of the flame arrow that Haley had shot was great, it seemed to be unable to fully display its power in the darkness, where dark law dominated. While being devoured by the dark law, the vortex of silver flames flickered and began to rapidly shrink. The warriors stood in the middle of the opposite bank, namely the leader, pointed at Zen with a contemptuous smile on his leering face. At the same time, the warrior put his hand on his neck in a throat-cutting gesture. When he had finished, the vortex of flame was completely engulfed and snuffed out by shadows. The 10 warriors on the other side once again immersed themselves in the darkness. They were protected by the concealing dark. There are 10 warriors in that group. Their strength must be great indeed, Janet said seriously. According to Janet's speculation, the 10 warriors on the other side could also be warriors that were currently contesting in the Hall of Causality. However, to everyone's surprise, this Hall of Causality was actually letting 2 groups of warriors stay opposite each other. These 10 warriors on the other side might also have passed through 2 halls of causality as well, but not a single one of them had died, as they still retained their original number of 10. The strength of these warriors could definitely not then be underestimated. What was even worse was that they had even set up the dark law in advance, hiding themselves within the darkness before their attack, which had made Zen and his group members less able to fend them off. Who can perform the dark law? Janet asked. The dark law was a rather unpopular law, and Janet hadn't mastered it. Although Zen had once received the baptism by laws, he had never comprehended nor favored the dark law. Hearing Janet's question, Jeffrey laughed coldly and responded, "We don't need the dark law. Look at me." Jeffrey clapped his hands together gently, and the Buddhist sound began to ring out, making the air quiver and filled with mist. A hallucinatory glow began emitting from his body, spreading in all directions. Zen and the others who were standing in the mist were unable to sense anything strange. However, to the warriors on the other side of the ditch, there appeared to be countless figures who were made out of thin air. Jeffrey had conjured a mass of additional illusion figures that mixed with the group of 7 warriors. It was difficult to tell which figure was real or not. Now the enemy could not spot their targets so easily. "I want to see how they hook us this time," Jeffrey sneered. Although the mist was unable to completely cover the 7 of them, it could still cause quite a bit of interference to confound their opponents. It seemed that the 2 groups of warriors had to fight a battle in this 3rd hall of causality, in addition to any other challenges that might still be waiting. In this mist, the warriors began to plan how to counterattack. Chapter 1256, Stratagem. In the darkness on the other side, warriors were in a daze, looking confused but seemed to be alert. There were 10 warriors stood in a row, staring deeply into the mist opposite them. In their eyes, the mist on the other side looked eerily thick as it gradually spread out, forming countless illusions, humans, snakes, insects, all the creatures in the universe. It only took several moments until the fog had starkly covered up the 7 of them. Swish! Amidst the darkness, someone threw out a long hook. They all heard a hissing sound. The long hook resembled a spear. It crossed a distance of 3,000 feet and flew straight into the fog. However, as the hook disappeared into the creepy fog, the figure the hook got in contact was only an illusion. Shortly after it dissipated, the hook returned without any gains. Some warrior behind the thick, creepy fog also threw out the hook, mimicking the warrior on the other side. Once a warrior was hooked from the other side, they could attack that one in groups to achieve an instant kill. For example, after Cain was hooked onto the other side, he didn't even have the strength to fight back before exploding into a ball of illusion points and being sent back to the main city. Right now, one side had exerted a dark law, while the other had summoned the fog to cover them up. Both parties were well hidden. These long hooks flew back and forth above the 3,000 feet wide abyss for several times, but they were ultimately unable to get a single warrior. Interesting. It's the elusive fog. One of those warriors is from the blessed Buddha land. The leader of the 10 warriors was also a human. He looked weak and thin as a bamboo stick, but there was a sharp glint in his eyes. It was as if there were 2 knives hidden in his calm eyes. They should have passed the first 2 halls of causality as well, and they have already lost 2 teammates. Now we have killed 1 more of them, so the team should only have 7 left. Ha ha, they are not that strong. Another warrior laughed coldly. Lone alone can deal with the left 7 warriors, right? The 3rd hall of causality is so easy to pass through, someone exclaimed in the darkness. If one side wanted to pass through the 3rd hall of causality, they would have to kill all the warriors on the other side. The entryway to Zen's group was the exit to these 10 warriors, and the entrance to the 10 was the exit to Zen's group of 7. And the only way to get through the 3rd hall of causality was to kill all the warriors on the other's path. Of course, Lone is an ace talent. How could there be a match for him? If we were to send Lone over, those fellows on the other side would be killed in a blink of an eye. Another warrior butted in. But the ones on the other side have the elusive fog to shield them. It's difficult to get them here through the hooks, someone spoke hesitantly. Big deal. They won't be able to break through my dark law as well, another warrior pointed out in the darkness. It was obvious that the dark law was set up by him. The rules of this hall of causality stated that each warrior of both parties should hold a long hook. The 2 parties would oppose each other across the abyss. To win the battle, they had to kill the warriors on the other side, one by one. In a stricter sense, the difficulties of the 3rd hall of causality were way more than that of before. And only one team could pass this hall of causality. All the losers then would be sent back to the main city. What created the current situation wasn't because of a single warrior, but it was for the reason that the competition in the illusion battlefield had become more and more intense, and the tension between warriors would get worse as well. The strong would gather more and more illusion points. But if lower-level warriors failed even once, it would be very tough for them to get up. Oh, it's all garbage. What you do can't soil the fog at all. Are we afraid of the other side? Remove that stupid thing. It's so black in here that we can't see anything. A tall figure kept ranting in the darkness. It was a 10 feet tall ogre. Humph, I set up this dark law to protect everyone. The warrior burst out in disagreement. I don't need your protection. I stand right here, and I want to see who dares to provoke me. The ogre shouted again. You. The 2 of them started arguing. Withdraw that, the one named Lone insisted indifferently. Remove the dark law around Damon. Lone, are you sure about that? The warrior asked. Damon, if they were to see you, they would probably hook you over. If that case happens, remember to drag me over too, Lone said airily. But you still need to be careful. The ones who can enter the hall of causality are all strong after all. The ogre named Damon laughed. Ha ha. Don't worry, they are just a bunch of cowards. They only know how to hide in the fog and don't dare to fight a real battle. If I go over, I'll defeat them all. Why should we be afraid? Don't underestimate your opponents, Lone urged. You go first, and then turn around and pull me over through your hook. There was a faint trace of unquestionable power in Lone's tone. Damon held a high status among the ogres and was an unruly and untamable warrior. Not to mention the warriors of other races, even the elders of the ogres found it hard to make him listen to them. However, Damon was docile in front of Lone, because he saved his life in the 2nd hall of causality. To be exact, Lone had broken through the intractable situation in the 2nd hall of causality by himself and brought the other 9 warriors across the 2nd test safe and sound. Everyone was extremely impressed with Lone. After hearing Lone's words, Damon nodded his head and assured him, in a respectful tone, I remember that already, Lone. As long as I go over, I will definitely pull you over. Ha ha. All right. Get ready, Lone countered indifferently. Not before long, there was a sudden change strangely occurring on one side of the abyss. Total murkiness shrouded it obscurely, but now part of the darkness had caved in. In a seemingly tense atmosphere, a burly figure holding a giant golden pestle gradually revealed himself. It was the tall ogre, Damon. Behind the fog, Zen, Janet, Jeffrey, Haley, and the rest all had their eyes fixed on that ogre inching his way up. Previously, they made several attempts throwing the hooks to get the ones over to their sides but to no avail, causing the situation to become somewhat ill at ease like they were in tenterhooks. Although Zen could discern some shadows in the darkness with his magical eyes, the shadows were still quite blurry. Besides, his enemies on the other side were also quite vigilant. He had tried to hook one of them over 3 times but always failed in the end. But this time, not only his opponents had voluntarily removed part of the power of the Dark Law, but they also pushed that ogre out of the darkness. What was this supposed to mean? In that span of a moment, the warriors on Zen's side all felt uneasy and became hesitant altogether. Did they do it on purpose? Jeffrey uttered under his breath as he stared hard at the tall ogre. That should be it. It is more likely that they are conjuring some kind of a trick up in their sleeves. Janet nodded as she quickly assumed. Coleman closely watched the ogre across the abyss, and his mouth was wide open as he was stunned. He finally exclaimed, that is Damon. Damon. Zen stared at Coleman as he heard the latter's sudden outburst. Coleman nodded. He seemed to have recognized the ogre across the abyss. This is Supreme Lord Matthias's only son, Damon. Even this guy also comes here. This hall of causality is too difficult to pass. Jeffrey glanced at Coleman and probed him further, is this guy that strong? I have never heard the one named Damon among the ace talents of the ogres. As far as Jeffrey was concerned, their opponents wouldn't be too difficult to deal with as long as they weren't the ace talents from those famous races or groups. No, he is not an ace talent, because his fate is not strong enough to be one. But his strength and talent are not inferior to any of ace talents. Coleman continued. Whether being an ace talent or godly genius, a warrior had to have the fate to lead the world of chaos. But it would never mean that the ones who had such a destiny were qualified to be ace talents. What Coleman wanted to say was simple. The ogre couldn't be an ace talent merely because he was not fated to be one. But with such strength, his power should not be underestimated. Thus, after hearing Coleman's words, Jeffrey, Janet, and the others eventually wore a solemn expression, especially now that the ogre had the confidence to stand there and wait for them to make a move. Zen gripped the hook hard in his hand and keenly observed the ogre. He noted that there was a river filled with illusory energy as he shifted his gaze from the ogre down to the deep ravine. Regardless of this warrior's strength, there was no way for him to break free from the laws of the heavens contained within the hook. The moment the ogre was hooked over, he would be on the defensive and have no way to get rid of it. Yet, he was beaming with confidence. He must be relying on something else. As Zen was currently in deep thought contemplating about that, Damon across the 3,000-foot-wide ravine roared provokingly, "Hey! The bunch of cowards over there! I am standing right here. Even now, none of you dare to make a move against me. You guys really suck. Why don't you give up as soon as possible? Remove that mist. Come over to kneel and beg for mercy from me. I can let you die a little faster. Come on, throw your hook, hook me over. I will never fight back, and never curse back." Chapter 1257, A Little Game. Damon, standing across the deep ravine, was constantly provoking Zen and the others. However, from inside the fog there was nothing but silence. After a long while, a voice finally sounded with a ghostly echo from within the mist. "Idiot." When Damon heard this voice, he was momentarily stunned before a furious look appeared on his face. "You dare to scold me? Idiot," yet another voice said in an almost bored tone. "You're the idiot," Damon roared, his voice echoing throughout the spacious hall. "Liar. Didn't you say that you won't fight back or return curses? I only scolded you twice, and already you swore in return. How can I then believe your words?" Zen's voice retorted from within the mist. I. Damon was startled, and his words stalled in his throat at hearing the rebuke. He had been trying to provoke his enemies, but now he was the one who became infuriated due to Zen's words instead. He didn't know how to respond now. "Damon, don't concern yourself with them. They won't be able to last long." Lone's voice floated over from the darkness. Damon suddenly nodded, took heart and said, "You are right. Let's see how long these guys can endure." Ha ha. Janet, who was in the fog, laughed as she looked at Zen, who was standing beside her. "I didn't know that you are also just as good at verbal quarreling as at actual fighting." Zen shrugged his shoulders and smiled. Right at that moment, his left hand shot out like a lightning bolt and grabbed Janet, retreating a step to the right. In the blink of an eye, a hook shot out across the deep ravine and flew straight towards Janet. Thanks to Zen's swift reflexes, Janet was able to escape being caught. That was close. Janet got so frightened that she stood out in a cold sweat. If she had been caught by the hook, she would definitely have been killed by the 10 opponents. Even if Zen and the others were then still able to pass through this hall of causality, the next part of this saga would have no mention of her. There's someone on the other side who has the ability to see through my fog. I don't know whether this is due to the sounds in the mist or something else, Jeffrey said with a grave expression on his face. Just like Zen's magical eyes were able to see through some of the dark laws, some of the warriors on the other side seemed in turn able to see through the elusive fog as well. I can kill them using this, said Haley, who had been silent all this time, as she gently lifted the moon-bursting flame bow in her hand. Zen smiled faintly at this moment. Don't bother, I'll deal with this ogre. However, they will definitely have other tricks up their sleeves. We'd better stand further apart. After passing through the second hall of causality, Zen had become their unofficial leader. Since Zen had spoken, he must then have the confidence to do as he pledged. Therefore, no one had any objections. Soon after, Zen's figure flashed, and he appeared in the middle of the fog. His eyes fixed on the ogre across the deep ravine. His left hand grasped the long chain affixed at the end of the hook, and his right hand suddenly hurled the hook towards that ogre. Because Jeffrey had summoned the fog, both sides were in a stalemate. Now that their impasse was about to be broken, everyone had naturally reached a state of high tension. Swoosh! The long hook drew a bright silver arc through the air, heading straight for the ogre. At this moment, Zen saw a cunning smile spread on the ogre's face. However, Zen's expression was incomparably calm. No matter what ability the ogre possessed, Zen could still instantly kill him. The speed of this hook was extremely fast. In the blink of an eye, it crossed the 3,000 feet gap and attached to the ogre. With a light tug from Zen, the ogre was pulled over by him. In principle, the hooks in this hall of causality were special treasures that belonged to the illusion battlefield. It was similar to the teleportation token in Zen's hands. The rules contained within the hooks were nearly unbreakable and warriors were powerless to act against these irresistible laws. This hook wouldn't cause any harm to a martial artist, but at the same time, no one could break free from it either. The moment that the ogre was hooked, his burly body had almost no weight and was immediately reeled in by Zen like a fish on a line. Huff! As the ogre was pulled towards Zen, he simultaneously let out a wild and mocking laugh. At the same time, his body suddenly erupted with wild and violent forceful energy. A body refiner's forceful energy would usually erupt within the body of a martial artist. Because the forceful energy couldn't be used to visualize things like life vitality, there was no need to channel forceful energy out of one's body to use it. However, when this ogre named Damon roared aloud as soon as he was pulled over, the forceful energy within his body instantly transformed into diamond-shaped crystals that covered the surface of his body. Forceful crystal armor. This skill came from Supreme Lord Matthias' transcendent divine might. Everyone knew that the risk of being caught by their enemies was very high. The warriors who entered the halls of causality were all ruthless figures of the illusion battlefield, and had all established reputations for being resourceful and not to be trifled with. These warriors all featured at the top of the food chain in the main cities, and they were almost invincible. Obviously, Damon had the utmost confidence in his forceful crystal armor. After condensing the forceful energy into the forceful crystal armor, even the warriors at the Spirit Supreme Realm and Spirit Transformation Realm wouldn't be able to break through his defense in a short period of time. Soul Sea Realm warriors didn't stand a chance of even fracturing the powerful armor. Damon would have plenty of time to throw the hook backwards, and as long as he could hook Lone over with him, this bunch of cowards, who hid in the mist, would reach the end of their path in the halls of causality. As soon as he had condensed the forceful crystal armor, he wanted to throw his hook towards the back. As for any attacks from his enemies, his forceful crystal armor would deal with them and protect him. However, at this moment, Zen didn't make a move, instead, he only smiled. Damon also noticed Zen's smile, but he failed to read anything into it. However, as Zen's smile appeared, another long hook flew out from behind Zen and sucked Damon in, pulling him off his feet yet again. Whop! The moment the second long hook wrapped around Damon, his forceful crystal armor was destroyed by the rules of the heavens contained within the long hook. Not far away, Jeffrey was clutching the long hook, while he stared indifferently at Damon. It was as if he was looking at an idiot. According to the rules of the Hall of Causality, a martial artist who was caught by the long hook was unable to break free and became powerless to fight back. The forceful crystal armor possessed an extremely strong defensive power, but no matter its strength, it still couldn't overcome the rules of the Hall of Causality. Originally, Zen had intended to immediately push this ogre into the deep ditch. It was likely that no one would be able to resist the colorful energy river inside it. Even if Zen were to fall into it, he too would undoubtedly die. However, his original plan still had some risks. As always, he was extremely confident in his own strength. It was likely that very few in his generation would be able to match him in terms of strength. However, with so many geniuses in the illusion battlefield, and given the confidence of this ogre, Zen had to come up with a more secure method of overcoming their enemy. The laws of causality in the halls of causality were often filled with hidden murderous intent. If someone violated the laws, they would be killed. For example, the energy river in the trench and the square boulders in the second hall of causality were not to be underestimated. But the mighty power of the laws of causality could be taken advantage of as well, if one was very clever. This long hook contained an extremely fierce law of causality. The martial artists that were hooked were placed in a special state. In this state, the martial artists had no weight and couldn't fight back. They also couldn't use life vitality or forceful energy, nor could they be harmed while attached to the hook. Only once they were released from the hooks would the two sides be able to fight and slay their enemies. Therefore, as soon as Damon condensed the forceful crystal armor, Jeffrey, who had been hidden not too far away, immediately shot out his hook. The diamond-shaped crystal that Damon had consumed lots of his forceful energy to condense was naturally broken by the heavens, rules contained in the hook. As for Jeffrey, he hooked Damon over to his side and quickly retreated out of reach. He did not dare to confront Damon directly. At this moment, Damon's face revealed a trace of panic. The forceful crystal armor that he had spent a large amount of his forceful energy to condense was instantly broken by a small hook, just like that. This was the strongest transcendent divine might his father had ever mastered, but it was destroyed by a mere hook. Forceful crystal armor. Damon reacted extremely fast. He did not attack Jeffrey, but instead he focused and condensed his forceful crystal armor once again. At the same time, he threw the hook in his hand. The most important thing for him was to hook Lone over so that he might have reinforcements. Swish! But this time, Janet, who was standing even further away, cast out her hook. Damon's forceful crystal armor was just formed, while it was also broken by Janet's deftly thrown long hook. At the same time, it wrapped around Damon's burly body and he was again knocked down and pulled towards Janet. It was like they were playing a little game of tug-of-war with him. One warrior after another dragged Damon along. There was not a single stop between them. The instant he was released by Janet's long hook, another hook wrapped around him once again. As for Damon's forceful crystal armor, it was constantly being condensed, and also swiftly crushed by the heavens, rules contained in the long hooks. Damon never received the chance to throw his own hook back at Lone. Chapter 1258, Disarm. Damon was being pulled around like a toy, hooked to multiple leashes in the hands of several people, and was screaming in rage. You guys entered the Hall of Causality before us and took the initiative, but it doesn't look like you used your brain. Advancing in the Hall of Causality doesn't need brute force. You might be a martial artist at the Soul Sea realm, as powerful as an ace talent and with a supreme divine weapon in your hand. But the law of causality contained in the supreme divine weapon you hold would still not be as strong as the rules laid down by the heavens. Reasonable use of the rules is the key. I do not know the original name of the law of causality contained within the long hook, so I will call it, disarm. Once you are hooked, you do not have the ability to resist, even if you are an ace talent. And that's because you are disarmed. Zen said, fixing Damon with a steady gaze. His voice wasn't loud, but everyone in the Hall of Causality could hear him clearly. When the 9 people hiding in the darkness on the other side heard this, panic filled them. The 10 of them had entered the Hall of Causality and had set up the Dark Law long before Zen had. They had seized the initiative. But they didn't spend much time or effort observing the long hooks in their hands. It wasn't that they didn't think of it on purpose, just that they were too conceited for it to have occurred to them. Of the 10 people on their side, 1 was an ace talent, 2 were descendants of Supreme Lords, and 2 were descendants of Grand World Lords. In addition to the ace talent, the 4 descendants were also fated to lead the world of chaos. Why would such a strong group even look at a group like Zen's? So Damon suggested that Zen's group hook him to the other side and he then bring Lone over. What followed was torture, simple and crude. The only reason they dared execute such a plan was because of their full confidence in their own strength. They couldn't see what was happening amidst all the fog, but they could imagine what was happening to Damon. The guy who was talking is really interesting, Lone said, grabbing the hook and studying it. He had never thought about how strong the law of causality was. He only knew that this hook had the protection of the rules of the heavens and couldn't be broken. And once the hook caught someone, it would definitely bring him over. What do we do now? Damon has not died yet. Should we save him? Another warrior asked. Lone stretched his arms and said rather helplessly, how can I save him? If he hooks me up, I will obviously be able to kill the people on the other side. All the other martial artists fell silent. Damon's loud cry pierced everyone's ears, as if jeering at the martial artist's childishness. Whoever it was wouldn't be happy being played around with so easily. Especially not one of a group of proud and arrogant talents. Since he'd been caught, Damon was obviously the unhappiest of them all. Coleman had a complacent smile on his face. They were both ogres, but he didn't have the conscience to pity his own kind. All the illusion points Coleman had obtained were from his own kind. He had probably killed thousands of his own kind on this trip alone. Right now, all he knew was that this guy before him wasn't his companion. My turn, Coleman said, throwing the long hook once again and pulling Damon towards him. The moment Damon skidded to a halt before him, another long hook shot over. Zen had struck again. But there were no other hooks when Zen pulled Damon up behind him. Damon was stunned. With a roar, he struck out with both palms, his impressive strength on display. He had wanted to kill all 7 of them by himself. But now, Damon didn't have the time to throw the hook to pick up Lone. All he wanted was to smash this human youth's head into a pile of mud. The 2 palms came together, slapping each other with great force. It was powerful enough to destroy a temple. Zen, however, merely gazed at Damon and said, "It's over." Jeffrey's short figure leapt high into the air, the Buddha curse blade silently sweeping past Damon's neck. Buddha said that life and death for all living things in this world will always be a cycle of reincarnation. You should be reincarnated, Zen said with a smile, but his eyes were flat. He then patted Damon's chest, transmitting a powerful force into Damon's body that destroyed his internal organs. He would not really be reincarnated because they were in the illusion battlefield. After being killed in the Hall of Causality, Damon would naturally be kicked out and would have to return to the main city to wait for his revival. A trickle of blood spurted down Damon's neck, widening as the blood flowed. The color of the blood was brown. Bam! The huge body fell to the ground before Zen. As his body gradually disintegrated, countless illusion points began to dissipate from within and shot towards Zen. Buddha never said that, Jeffrey said, visibly depressed. Since he cultivated in a great temple, he knew that Zen was spewing a load of garbage. But at the same time, he said, why do all these illusion points belong to you? Whoever killed the opponent would be able to absorb half their illusion points. Jeffrey had unleashed the most lethal blow. In comparison, Zen had only sent out a single palm strike. The rule of the illusion battlefield determined who possessed the illusion points. Zen didn't know why he had absorbed all the illusion points in Damon's body. Since Damon had had more than 2 million illusion points, Jeffrey was naturally depressed. Don't worry, there are still 9 people left on the other side, Zen said with a smile. In the 3rd Hall of Causality, 2 groups of people were clashing. The difficulty had increased, but the rewards were also incomparably generous. After all, those who were able to enter the Hall of Causality were martial artists who were extremely wealthy. If they could pay 5 million illusion points, they would have had at least 7 million illusion points in their bodies. And once someone killed any one of them, they could obtain at least 1 million illusion points. This guy shouldn't be the strongest person on the other side, Janet said, staring at Damon's fading figure. I think so, Zen said, nodding and looking at the dark space before him. He took a pause before he added, in addition to this ogre martial artist, the one who has used the dark law has extraordinary strength. I have a feeling there's another powerful character hidden along with him. Or this ogre martial artist wouldn't be so daring. When he was hooked, he wanted to pull the other person over, Haley said. Going by that, this person should have the confidence to kill all of us. A person with such confidence should at least be an ace talent, Janet added. The other martial artists scowled darkly as this conclusion was reached. There were more than 100 warriors in the entire universe who could be called ace talents, and each of the 50 supreme worlds of the illusion battlefield only had 3 ace talents on an average. Some supreme worlds probably had more ace talents, and some did not even have a single one. When Janet had first entered the Hall of Causality, she had 2 ace talents accompanying her. And now, she was facing a 3rd ace talent as her opponent. How should we deal with that ace talent? Jeffrey asked, his voice low. Even though he was powerful, he didn't have the strength to fight against an ace talent. Sensing this subtle change in the atmosphere, Zen smiled faintly and said, Even if there is an ace talent, we can still kill him. But that ace talent has now also understood the rules of this long hook. I'm afraid they won't be hooked over by us now. What about letting them hook me over? What? Jeffrey said, surprised. Everyone was clear about the power of this long hook. The disarm could destroy almost any power or martial skills. The only ones who could struggle free of the heavens rules were probably the Supreme Lords. Even a World Lord would probably be unable to resist if he were caught by the hook and would be bound before he knew it. Zen understood this logic, so why was he making such a suggestion? Zen laughed at Jeffrey's blank expression and said, I am just kidding. I'm not that stupid. Chapter 1259, Hesitation. Zen was unable to challenge the rules of the hook. The square boulders in the second hall had originally been ordinary stones. But because they contained a rule of the heavens, Zen was unable to move the boulders the slightest bit, even if he burst out with all his might. In this universe, only a Supreme Lord could break through a certain level of the rules of the heavens. At this point in time, Zen's strength was far from that. As Zen finished speaking, his gaze landed on Haley. This quiet demon knight woman held a longbow in one hand and a long hook in the other. She looked at the other side, her eyes brimming with caution. Moon-bursting flame bow. When Zen looked at the bow, his eyes glinted. He had already made up his mind. Perhaps, he said, I can be a stupid person for once. When Jeffrey and Janet heard Zen, doubt appeared on their faces. As for the absent-minded Coleman, he was even more confused. You want to get hooked over? What happened to Damon had been a terrible lesson. If Zen were to be hooked by his opponents, his end result would be the same as Damon's. They would use the long hooks in their hands to jostle him and then easily kill him. Perhaps, Zen said, shrugging lightly. It was a chaotic energy transmission that carried over his words. Although there was a distance of 3,000 feet between the two sides, a martial artist's hearing sense was good enough to hear Zen. Time quietly passed by in this confrontation. Most of the warriors in the Hall of Causality were starting to feel anxious. Almost all the martial artists who entered this place could make it into the top 300 of the Supreme World. But the competition in the illusion battlefield was becoming more and more intense, and the other warriors at the top of the ranks were gaining illusion points at a heightening speed. If they got nothing here, their ranks would plummet. Anyone who did not gain enough points would decline in the rankings. During the confrontation, the martial artists outside of the halls of causality were gaining illusion points at an insane speed. Thus, the rankings of the warriors in here were naturally falling. Every time they checked their rankings, they would realize that they had slipped by 1 or 2 spots. Lone, are we going to wait like this forever? Someone cried out. Lone sat in the same spot. His gaze was fixed on the endlessly churning mist. He asked with a smile, and why can't we wait? But, the other side should be even more anxious than us, Lone said airily. They will lose their patience sooner or later. Truthfully, Lone was not so confident at this moment. It was not that he did not believe in his abilities. If the third hall of causality only meant for the two sides to kill each other, then the problem would be easy to solve. He alone was enough to deal with the 7 warriors on the other side. It was not a difficult matter for him. However, just like what the warrior across the deep ravine had said, strength was not the key to victory in the hall of causality. Rather, it all depended on who had a grasp on the rules within. Damon was indeed very strong, and among the 10 of them, probably his strength was merely second to Lone's. This was why Lone could sit back and let Damon get hooked over. He believed that Damon would have enough time to pull him over as well. But the outcome had been surprising. Damon was tricked into getting killed by his opponents. He did not even get the opportunity to fight back. His death made Lone more vigilant. Swish! A long hook suddenly flew out. But eventually, the attack still failed. Both sides tried to probe each other, but in vain. They were unable to lock onto the other. It was as if they were fishing in a dark river, helplessly unaware about when and if at all their targets would take the bait. Apart from the long hooks, the two sides tried other attacks as well, including throwing knives and bows. But in the end, they did not succeed. Neither of the sides found it difficult to dodge such attacks. Swiftly, Zen left the fog and came to stand before everyone on the other side. The moment Zen appeared, the 9 people led by Lone stared, confusion marring their faces. Did he just emerge from the fog to emulate Damon? Is he wanting to be hooked over by us? Does he want to be friends with death? He's not even strong like Damon. So what if he was strong like Damon? If he gets hooked over, we could easily kill him, just like how they killed Damon. Let me do it. In the darkness, some warriors were so eager to try and kill Zen, wanting to throw their long hooks at him. When Lone saw Zen, at first he remained quiet. He then said in an indifferent tone, "Wait a moment." Lone's brow creased as he looked at Zen. They had already killed Damon, so it was obvious that Zen understood the rules of the hooks in their hands. Once the target was ensnared by the hook, his or her skills were gone, due to which he or she was unable to fight back. Under these circumstances, the person before them still dared to leave the elusive fog. He was either a fool or someone with a scheme in his head. Thinking of this, Lone's voice floated over the darkness. "You're the one who just spoke. Were you the one who killed Damon?" His tone was full of apathetic arrogance. An air of patronization seeped into his words. Zen looked through to the darkness on the other side. His gaze landed in the direction the voice had come from. His magical eyes were activated, and he saw a blurry figure sitting quietly in the darkness. "Yes, it was me. Do you have a problem with it?" Zen asked. "Are you not afraid of death, now that you have revealed your position?" Lone asked again. "Ha, it's not like I will meet my real death here. In the illusion battlefield, everything is a mere projection. Why should I be scared?" Zen asked. Lone stared at Zen dispassionately as a hint of hesitation appeared on his face. Since the enemy was willing to show himself, he must have already made up his mind. Lone frowned as he tried to figure out what Zen was planning. The third hall of causality they were in was like a game of wits. Only by relying on one's deeper understanding of the rule could one take the initiative to make their move. Lone had always been a conceited person. But now, facing Zen, he felt a little uneasy and worried. "Are you afraid of throwing your hook?" Although Zen smiled, he was a bit anxious in his heart. If the one on the other side did not want to hook onto him, he had no way to exercise his next move. "Since none of you is willing to throw your hook, let me do it." Whoosh! He had only caught the glimpse of a vague shadow in the darkness, but his long hook still shot out and flew straight to the person sitting in the darkness. The long hook was like a shuttle, reaching its target in the blink of an eye. The speed at which Zen threw the long hook reached its peak, but Lone's reaction was not slow either. He moved 2 feet aside and easily dodged Zen's hook. Out of confidence, he had only moved a couple of feet. However, Zen had never intended to get Lone by the hook. His action had only been a provocation of sorts. It was similar to what Damon had done. Damon had provoked Zen through his words, but Zen was goading Lone through his action. Zen did not pause even for a moment when his hook missed its target. His vision was already firmly locked onto the blurry, skinny figure. The long hook in his hand once again shot out. Whoosh! As the long hook flew toward Lone, his figure moved a few more feet to avoid the hook. Once, twice, thrice, again and again, Zen struck out with his hook, but to no avail. He wore a faint smile on his face, seeming very patient. Lone, who still resided in the darkness, finally had a look of anger on his face. Swish! As he dodged Zen's hook, the long hook in his own hand shot out and charged straight at Zen. Finally, Zen's eyes flashed. This was the moment he had been waiting for. When Zen saw the long hook rush to drag him into it, he smiled. The long hook halted all of a sudden, not too far away from him. Lone grabbed the chain at the end of the long hook and forcibly pulled it back. As Zen looked in the direction of the retracting hook, a devious look surfaced in his eyes. Why are you withdrawing it?" No one said a word in the darkness on the other side, but soon after, a sharp aura emerged from the darkness. It was Lone. "Lone, why didn't you make a move?" a warrior asked. "He would die if you hooked him over. Why did you hesitate?" Some of the warriors were utterly perplexed at Lone's lack of action. Slowly, Lone stood up and looked at Zen from head to toe. A sense of foreboding had enveloped him the moment he raised the hook, so he withdrew it at the last moment. However, the warriors around him could not hold it in any longer. One of them suddenly lashed out a long hook at Zen. Lone did not have the chance to stop him. Chapter 1260, A Mysterious Sword. Zen's provocation worked. From the darkness, a long hook shot toward Zen and instantly caught him. The moment it gripped Zen, his body was bound by a strange rule. This rule did not allow him to resist the attack. His entire body was as if imprisoned in chains and he was pulled into the darkness like a weightless feather. "Now!" Zen shouted. The moment Zen was pulled over, Haley let go of the bowstring. Before her moon-bursting flame bow were 3 swirling balls of flame that floated in the air. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. The target of the 3 round flames was no other than Zen. Truthfully, Haley too hesitated at the moment. The moon-bursting flame bow could be called a supreme divine weapon and naturally had its strong points. She was unable to fully unleash the power of the flame arrow. An ordinary martial artist would never be able to withstand its full power. Even an ace talent would be likely to back off. But Zen had insisted on it. He had promised her that nothing would happen to him. In the end, Haley could only do as she was told. Humph, Lone snorted. Someone else from his side was pulling Zen over. His thin figure flashed as he marched toward Zen. Lone had been unable to come up with a method to break the stalemate, but that did not mean that he was afraid of Zen. No matter what tricks you are playing, you must die now that you have come over to our side, Lone said in a cold voice. He waved one of his arms and a long sword materialized in his hand. Lone had another famed name. He was also known as Lone, the otherworldly swordsman. The otherworldly swordsman was the only ace talent among all independent warriors. An ace talent was the hope of a large clan. Usually only a few ace talents could be found in a clan. To raise an ace talent often required sparing no efforts on the clan's part. When Lucille had participated in the battles of the Illusion battlefield, even the patriarch of the G clan had to personally pay attention to her. However, in the universe, there were always cases of unique existences. Lone was one of them. It had taken him 31 years to reach the Soul Sea realm. The universe was rife with talents, especially because of the world of chaos. The time period of 31 years was not particularly less. After all, after the beginning of the world of chaos, the core talents reached the Soul Sea realm quite rapidly. In the past, it was rare for someone to reach the Soul Sea realm before the age of 50. But now, it was not a special occurrence to do so. Many core talents had reached the Soul Sea realm at the age of 21 or 22. But what was truly impressive about Lone was that he had gained that achievement all by himself. He had transformed from an unknown independent warrior to the otherworldly swordsman who defeated an ace talent from the blessed Buddha land. Because of that battle, Lone, the otherworldly swordsman, became well known. At that time, the thoughtless minds had no clue that an independent warrior could create such havoc. The 4 great clans extended him an olive branch. The ace talent was just an address, but Lone had defeated his opponent, which meant that he already possessed the strength to fight an ace talent. Thus, Lone was an ace talent himself. No one wanted to let go of such a superior talent. However, Lone stubbornly refused them. Although he knew enough about the power of the 4 great clans, he was also aware that if he could obtain the guidance of a supreme lord, it would be unimaginably beneficial to him. Still, he chose to refuse their offer. The reason was that his sword made him reject it. Lone had only been able to achieve so much because of his sword. Before that, he had been an ordinary, impoverished martial artist. With his cultivation at the nature level, he had been like a speck of dust in the upper world. Once, when Lone had been battling it out with someone, he was almost beaten to death and then thrown into a disorderly cemetery. He lay there for 7 days and 7 nights and found the sword beside a corpse after he woke up. The dark iron sword looked ordinary and nothing like a godly weapon. It had been abandoned at a cemetery, so it was obvious that no one had bothered to keep it. The moment Lone touched the sword, he was enveloped by a strong consciousness. This dark iron sword that he now held in his hand had a consciousness of its own. The supreme martial arts that he cultivated and the rare secret lands that he explored had all been bestowed upon him by the iron sword. This iron sword was not only his strongest weapon and asset, but also his master, his benefactor. After obtaining this sword, Lone rose to prominence. As an independent warrior, he had amassed a great many treasures in the supreme worlds. He had also participated in the competition of the 4 great clans as an independent warrior. From an unknown junior, he had slaughtered his way into the domain of the ace talents. From then on, Lone only rose to prominence. Now, in the midst of the thoughtless minds, he was walking shoulder to shoulder with Lawson, Nathan, and Lucille. Most people considered what Lone had done to be miraculous among independent warriors. In absolute strength, all schemes are futile. Suddenly, the consciousness of Lone's sword communicated with him. I know. Before I shouldn't have hesitated. Lone's face was unreadable. At this moment, he suddenly wielded his sword as he charged towards Zen. The sword had accompanied Lone for many years. He had speculated on its origins. It did not belong to this round of the universe, rather, it came from a higher level of existence, an existence that surpassed the heavens. The sword had informed him that the region was known as the Divine Land. In the beginning when the sword had been with him, they had only used up each other's strengths. However, after being in the company of each other for so many years, their relationship had only grown deeper. He knew some of the secrets of the sword, and the sword helped him to become a godly genius and surpass the heavens. When the illusion battlefield opened, the sword told Lone that the competition was crucial. In the illusion battlefield, Lone had encountered no resistance so far. The number of people in the entire universe who were truly capable of challenging him as an opponent was not high. After considering this, the young man before Lone seemed to be far cleverer, but he was still not powerful enough to contend Lone. However, the moment Zen regained his freedom in the darkness, 3 powerful round flames shot out from behind him. The warrior who had hooked Zen was impulsive, but that did not mean that he had not made sure that he would succeed. The moment he hooked Zen, he had made his move. The short spear in his hand went straight for Zen's head. As soon as the spinning tip of the spear got near Zen, it was sure to impale him and crush his head. However, the warrior did not expect 3 fiery arrows to appear right behind Zen just as the latter was about to be stabbed by the spear. Dang it, the warrior cursed silently. At this moment, he did not care whether or not he could kill Zen. His figure flashed. He was about to escape out of sight. A faint smile appeared on Zen's face as both of his hands shot out like lightning and took hold of the warrior. His hands were like iron hoops and firmly clamped on the warrior's body. Zen would not allow him to break free. Die. At the same time, Lone's black iron sword pierced through the darkness and headed straight for Zen. He did not need to think about how to attack Zen. The dark iron sword could handle almost everything by itself. It was his greatest source of reliance, and also like a part of him. Back then, when he had defeated the ace talent at the Blessed Buddha land, he had not relied on his own strength. He had fully been dependent on the iron sword in his hand. The dark iron sword belonged to him, and in a sense, he too belonged to the sword. However, before the sword could arrive near its target, the 3 balls of flame exploded. Boom, boom, boom. The 3 flames burst into nothingness, creating dazzling light that one found hard to gaze at. Even the Dark Law was unable to restrain the light emitted by the flame. It seemed to want to devour the Dark Law. The martial artist that had activated the Dark Law stood close by, looking dejected. He was trying his level best to maintain the Dark Law that he had set up. Ah! The other warriors ran away the moment the 3 balls of flame exploded. The ones captured burned to ashes in the flames. After all, the moon-bursting flame bow was a supreme divine weapon and had a special law of causality exclusive to the fire element. How could a warrior of the Soul Sea realm tolerate it? When Lone saw the blazing flames, the pupils of his eyes shrunk in fear. His first instinct was to retreat. Perhaps it was only because of the sword that he had achieved so much. Strictly speaking, Lone's warrior spirit was not so strong, but that was unimportant. The sword was already a part of Lone and represented him. Do not be afraid. What you're seeing is the 6th level of the fire law, the fierce flame explosion. I can help you block it. The dark iron sword sent a strand of its consciousness to Lone. At the same time, a golden beam of light shot out from within the dark sword. The light was transmitted from the sword hilt. The golden light turned Lone's arm golden too. It spread over to his shoulder, chest, and neck. In the blink of an eye, he transformed into a radiant golden figure. The impact of the fierce flame explosion was unable to harm Lone in the slightest. Still, that boy has displayed quite a technique. Is he unafraid of the fierce flame explosion himself? Would he not get hurt? The dark iron sword was puzzled. It had no answer to this mystery. It was only after Lone and the sword had charged into the fierce flame explosion that the dark iron sword was able to glean what had occurred. Just like Lone, Zen's entire body was enveloped with a layer of golden light. The difference lay in the fact that the dense golden vortexes on Zen's body seemed to rapidly be absorbing the flame that had broken out in the fierce flame explosion. This is. As the dark iron sword observed the transformation in Zen's body, the surprise it betrayed in its thoughts was not hidden from Lone. What is this? Lone asked with hesitation. Ever since he had established the connection with the dark iron sword, he had realized that everything in the universe was like child's play to the sword. It never regarded any of the Supreme Lords as being unbeatable, as if there was nothing in the universe worthy of its shock. But at this moment, when the black iron sword noticed the difference in Zen's body, it expressed its astonishment. Nothing. Let's kill him first. The sword sent another message to Lone. All right. By now, Lone had come very close to Zen. In fact, most techniques that the dark iron sword had taught Lone were movement techniques. The sword was an invincible existence. As long as Lone approached his opponent, he was able to leave the problem of attack to the sword without further worries. Lone suspected that if he were to ever get physically close to a Supreme Lord, the sword would be able to kill the Supreme Lord with a single jab. Whoosh! The dark iron sword drew an arc in the air. It did not emit any kind of power. Only Lone himself knew just how terrible its action was. The young man before him was already a dead man. However, suddenly Zen smiled at Lone. He began to retreat and started to float over to the other side.